Thank you.
So I am going to officially call this meeting of the African American Black Student Success Plan Advisory Group to order. My name is Joyce Harris, and I am the chair, and I need to announce that our co-chair, Charles McGee, has resigned from the committee. And so when I saw the agenda, it said Joyce Harris, chair. I'll let Dr. T and Markeisha explain what's going on with that.
Yes, Madam Chair. Well, right now, we're doing a review of advisory committees, since we have a new deputy superintendent. So we don't know if we need to just have a chair, co-chair, or just a chair. So right now, Joyce would just be as chair. And if we do co-chairs, we'll probably discuss that at some point.
Okay. And just to remind people, all of these, our roles are appointed. So we were all appointed by at the time it was Salam, so it would be Colt. And so we all got the general letters appointing us to serve on this advisory committee. And then Charles and I were sent letters asking if we'd be willing to be co-chairs of this committee. So I just wanted to clarify that before anybody asks, what happened? What's going on? So this is our first meeting of the new year, and we always have to start with the roll call. So I guess I'll do it. Abdi Kadir Bashir, Ben Cannon,
Present.
Bobby Bridges Jr.,
Present.
Cynthia Richardson,
Present.
Erlene Wilson Huey,
Present.
Frank Hannah Williams,
Present.
George Russell, Joe McFerrin II, Kali Ladd.
Yeah.
Okay. Kendra Hughes.
Present.
Dr. Karen Fisher Gray, Lori Wimmer, Lillianne Green. I know she's on the phone.
Oh, present.
Marjorie Trueblood Gamble, Mark Jackson, and Kenge Harmon. Oh, okay. Thank you. And Kenge Harmon Johnson, Dr. Paul Coakley, Dr. Reginald Nichols, Renee Anderson,
Present.
Ronnie Herndon, Shella Swa Cryer,
Present.
Tony Hobson Sr., Dr. Yvette Alex Asenso. Okay. Is there anybody else on the phone? Okay. So if you look at our agenda, we have a pretty full agenda today. And we always start out by reviewing and approving the minutes from the previous meeting, which was December 1st. So everyone should have a copy of the minutes, and you should have received these by email. Is that correct, Markeisha?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So anybody have any comments, questions? Good morning. Good morning, Laurie. So I'm gonna call your name out and you have to say here. Laurie Wimmer? Here. Okay. So are there any questions, comments, changes that need to be made? Well, then, we need to get them.
Would you like a motion to? approve
Yes, I would like a
minutes?
motion.
And I will
That's-
move the approval of the December 1st meeting minutes.
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay. So minutes approved, and I know I did this backwards. I should have raised the questions after the motions, but it's okay. Okay, so our new business is to look at updates, to get reports from the department, to see what things have happened since our last meeting, any new things. And so given that this is department update time, I'm going to turn this over to Markeisha Smith.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So you have some bullet points there that are related to the updates that I'll give today, and a couple of things that we'll have some more in-depth conversation about, but the first few are pretty simple. So first is around our RFA process, and so January the 18th, we had our OARs approved by the state board, so that happened, and with that, we've now had the ability to continue to move forward in the process of awarding grants for this time period, right? So what would be 2017, 2019? Now we're looking at 2018, 20, yeah, but anyway, this biennium. So with that being said, we have grants have been reviewed, scored, and so now we need to look at that, calibrate them, and unfortunately, we were not able to do that in time for the meeting today, but we do have, as part of our timeline, that we are going to be sharing with grantees whether they have been awarded or not next week, and so as soon as that happens, then we will send out a message to this body, to the advisory group, to let them know who those new grantees are. So
Can you share with us how many?
we had seven
Applications.
in all, seven applications in all,
Okay.
and they were from Southern Oregon. We had some closer to the Portland area, here in the valley, like Salem. So
Thank you.
we will see what happens with that. Other questions related to grant awards?
Question, Marcy.
Yes, Kali.
Question, how many are you going to be awarding out of the seven?
So it really, we had $650,000 this round, and folks could really apply on tiers. So it depended on, it's going to depend on what budgets look like. And so once we look at that, so it's hard to give a number right now until we go back and look at the budgets to see where everyone is. Because
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Can I ask a question too?
Sure.
650, does that include the previous awardees too, or is this totally good?
This is separate. This was a new grant process.
And the decision was made to fund the grantees, do continuation funding for them with a 2%
2% reduction.
reduction in the dollars that they had received previously.
So when it gave some more funds we were able to put towards the new RFA. Other questions about grant awards? We're almost there. I've been waiting for this part of the process to happen. So excited about that. And then just quickly, RMC Research, so they were the winner again of the bid for the grant evaluator. And so they haven't really been able to do very much because we've kind of been in this holding pattern as we were waiting to see how things were going to work with our new RFA process. And so now that we're at a point where we're ready to kind of jump forward, their contract is being finalized, and we'll start scheduling regular meetings with them and the grantees. And so I just wanted you to know that there's still a player in this, but we've kind of had to put things on hold based on the other process that was taking place. Okay. So as you know, I think when I was here I guess Victor was here, December. He
yeah.
announced that he was leaving. He was going to City of Portland, and that has happened. I'm mourning that loss every day. He left me with some cool Post-it notes. I always say that. But vacant position is open, and it closes on the 26th of this month. So if you know folks, encourage them to apply. Go to the website and apply for that. It is a position that is both equity and civil rights, and I say that, make that distinction because some of the work will be related to like facilitation of this group, for instance, in the same way that, if you remember, Kendra did, and kind of management of grants related to that. But the other part of it is also doing some work with our two civil rights specialists, so Karen Moskin and Winston Cornwall, who has been here a couple of times now to speak to the advisory group. And so it'll be helping to facilitate some work around our civil rights components. So, yeah. So questions on that? And I will be excited to get that filled.
Yes, we will.
That will be, we've got 3 vacancies right now, so this will be one that we can get down, hopefully. Okay, and then legislative updates. So we're in a short session, as most of you know, and at this point, there have only been a couple of bills that have come through for equity to review. And if you know anything about the process, it's our new director for, I can't remember her full title, Jessica, is now in the role that is responsible for leading the legislative process here in the
She
department.
replaced Cindy Hunt.
No, she replaced Jan McComb.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Lobbyist.
Yes.
Yes.
She replaced Jan McComb.
Okay.
So we've had 2 bills that have come to us. I didn't unfortunately write the names of them down, but I can tell you what they're about. So one is related to after civil rights investigations around sexual harassment have taken place, this sharing of information, of student information. So that is one that has come across our desk in equity, and Karen Moskin, who is our expert in that on our team, is looking at that very carefully. There have been a lot of comments, public comments related to that one, so we anticipate that'll be some interesting conversation. It's sort of getting into some privacy rights around some things, and folks have, you know, something to say about that, obviously. Lori?
Our attorneys have been working on that one,
Good.
and it looks like they're shifting gears now.
Okay.
The legislative sponsor has shared with me that they're going to, instead of tracking the sexual harassment reporting piece, they're going to the sexual assault.
Okay.
Notice what, and it's gonna be mostly what students' rights are
Got
in
it.
the event of that kind of an incident, which we are much more comfortable with.
Okay.
So you might wanna know that for your.
Thank you.
civil
Thank
rights.
you for sharing that. I know Karen had mentioned there were some other things that were happening, and she
The
was potentially
Department
gonna
of
have to go
Justice
back and,
Was also involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So bigger one, bigger than just ODE, but
Yes.
it came here as well. And then the second is around, we often get these bills that ask us to, well, not maybe ask us necessarily, but will ask Chief Ed Office, for instance, to generate reports. And so there's one that is wanting Chief Ed Office to do a report specifically to how they say students who are in, I guess we would say marginalized groups, how they, you know, what their educators look like. And so it's very similar to what our Ed Equity report does, and I serve on that committee as well, as does Dr. Gray, Karen Fisher Gray. And so it's very similar to that, but it's along those same lines, kind of looking at, you know, years of service, those sorts of things, and how that is impacting students who are in marginalized populations. So those are the only 2 at this point that have come to the table for equity. So we'll see.
Sorry.
No, please.
There's another bill, and I can't recall the number now, and I will get back to you on it. But it feels like the Department of Redundancy Department, and it talks about education plans, and it
Okay.
seems like it's replicating a lot of the work that this group and the American
Okay,
Report and
we'll look for
others
that
have
one.
done.
Okay.
So I just wanted to raise that, and I can get you the bill number.
Please.
Okay.
Because that one hadn't come yet, so, yeah,
But it just seems
right.
kind of like, we've already been there.
Right. Just like this other report, but we do what we have to do with that. So that's where we are with legislative session update. And I know that, and I can get the dates to you, but I know Senate Ed and House Ed Committee are also ramping up to have meetings here, I think within the next week or so. Ben?
So there's another bill that may not have a sort of explicitly equity focused component, but I think it's important as it relates to equity, and it's House Bill 4102, which is another study bill related to school dropouts.
Okay.
And sort of how the state is
Got it.
responding to that.
Okay.
And it may be worth sort of putting on, I'm sure it's on the department's radar screen,
Right.
but maybe worth taking that sort of equity lens approach to that bill.
Okay,
as well.
thank you, Ben. Anybody else has heard anything? Often we get things, you are sort of, in the community, hearing these things, working on these issues, and so it's always good to hear what's happening so that we're prepared when it comes our way. Okay, thank you.
Okay, excuse me, did you mention the early learning, and I missed it?
I did not, so I hadn't seen one for early learning. Kali, can you give a little bit more about that one?
So there's an early learning equity bill. It's already, it was up last session. The subcommittee asked for us to, the early childhood subcommittee asked to bring it back this session. And it's a number of organizations, including mine, that are involved, that are cross-cultural groups. But it's focused on putting together an equity fund in early childhood that's supporting culturally specific work. Right now, millions of dollars goes to early childhood programming. None of that are culturally specific. So the ask right now, the ask last year, I think it was $5 million. It's $2.5 million now. It's not a huge pot, but it puts the mark to say we care about culturally specific services, and the state wants to invest in them, recognizing their value. So it's a big one for early childhood, and any support that this group or others can give would be helpful. In terms of people that are around this table, I think it's just Chiros and BPI that are the organizations. I don't know if FBI is as well, but it's Latino Network, and I don't know, there's like 8 organizations that are all culturally specific that are involved.
Thank you, Kali. Okay, someone else? Okay. So then our next couple of items are a little bit longer, and I want to, and Dr. T can chime in as well, because he's been obviously an instrumental part of this process along the way. But we just want to have some conversation around, we had an OAR piece that was happening, and that, of course, now has, we've gotten over that hump, and OARs have been passed. But so we had a sort of an OAR piece going on, as well as some concerns around our RFA and kind of the response to that. So you have some documents, and I would say you probably would, and these have been emailed to you, so it's information that you've had, but we wanted to actually bring it to the advisory group today and give you all an opportunity to have some dialogue around it. And the first I will call your attention to would be the letter from NAACP. So that was kind of the first component to that, and then the response pieces are what follow. And so there was one response on January 2nd that was the lengthier response that was based on what they call a finding of fact, related to the concerns that were raised by NAACP. And so folks within the department responded to that. And so that's the longer January 2nd letter. And then on the second is the longer memo. That's the one that Cynthia they just ran off.
Oh, this one here.
Yeah,
Okay, the one
that's-
she just gave us.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the one that's
Right.
got all the information. Yeah. And then January 5th was a little bit of a shorter response with some recommendations from COLT about how to move forward based on what we'd found here and based on the concerns that were raised in the letter from NAACP. So I'll give you a minute to kind of look through the material. If you haven't seen this before, if you hadn't had a chance to check your email and look through information, just to ground yourselves in it, and then we can open it up for comments or questions. Does everybody have everything?
Yes.
Okay, a couple more minutes. Okay, so, Dr. T, do you want to add anything before we start
Yes, I do.
discussion?
I want to make sure I call your attention to the January 5th letter from COAT, particularly starting on page 2. And what he's addressing are, as you see, 8 different points here. And that's what we plan on following. Particularly starting with 2, it talks about he's directing ODA staff to review the associated RFA for alignment, and we've done that. 3, assuming there continues to be complete alignment, directing ODA staff to proceed with the RFA grant awarding process, which we've done. He said we will collect input from SBA leadership and the governor's office to review the membership composition of the advisory group to ensure that the membership reflects the diversity of stakeholders who serve our state's African American Black Student Success Advisory Group. And even though he mentioned that, this particular group in there, we're looking at all our advisory groups in ODE, not just singling one out. So let you know that. So all the advisory groups, and I didn't know there were so many. 5, directing that the group continue to conduct its meetings as public meetings, which you know we're doing. Directing ODE Human Resources and Office of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion staff begin the recruitment process immediately for the staff position. Markeisha mentioned that earlier, and we're really proceeding on that. And if you know anyone who fits that job description, please forward him or her to us as soon as you can. We want to fill that soon. Maybe some people sitting around the table who have those credentials. That would be good, or know someone. But we want to fill that position. Also, number 7, he's directing ODE staff and consultation with the advisory group to make any necessary updates to the plan to ensure that the plan addresses the needs of African American Black students across the state. So that's going to be part of some of the work that we'll be able to do with the advisory committee. And then, of course, 8, directing ODE staff in consultation with you all and other stakeholders develop a budget proposal to be submitted as part of the governor's budget to ensure that there's continued funding for projects that are in alignment with the African American Black Student Success Plan. We've heard a lot from people regarding the amount of money, the $650,000, and of course, that's not enough to go along with the other millions. So we need to find ways and means of obtaining more funds. So that's one of the ways we're doing that. So we're really going to center on these different points and others that we come with.
So now we can just open it up for questions, comments, concerns, thoughts. And we also are going to share a little bit of the video from the state board meeting so that you can hear the comments specific to the OARs. It's kind of that section, so I'll get that queued up here in a moment so we can talk about that as well. But just for now, just kind of thinking about what you have here.
I just wanted to express my appreciation for the way you guys have kept us up to date on all of this as it's unfolded. It's really been very helpful. And it hasn't always been the way it's been in the past when there have been bumps in the road. And this has been markedly different. I really appreciate that.
And it's been helpful for us, too.
Yeah, I don't know how often ODE gets compliments. Thanks, Shaswa. But I was very satisfied and pleased with the response. My personal reaction as a community member to the NAACP is I plan on sharing my personal reactions with them. But I think it's a wonderful time for them to really address their concerns to the special group in the legislature right now, and can even talk about the inadequacy of, grant process to address those educational needs. Because the stuff that they talk about, particularly like the rural students and students in other areas, with the grant process, you don't get the money if you don't apply. And you don't get and even if you do apply, you don't get the money if your grant doesn't fit the criteria, or if you don't have a program, yeah, just saying. And so, I think it's a great, it's wonderful that, they've come together collectively across the state. And the fact that we've got this, special team to figure out education, it is a wonderful time for them to go and say, hey, this grant process, this is a sucky way to do education in the state. And you need to figure out how to do it equitably, as opposed to relying on, the community to beg you for some money to do it, for them to do it.
I also like to echo what Shalash was saying. The fact that we were having these same conversations of the points that they brought up, bringing in the rule and making sure that we tried to make this process go statewide to get kids all across the state. So they raised issues that we have been discussing here.
And when I came on board, that's one of the first things I mentioned to you all about how we need to broaden these things and see how we can expand it. So it was also of interest to me to read it.
It made me think, just quickly, when we first were kind of, as a group, and the work that Kendra was doing, kind of going across the state and even sharing that we had a plan coming and that there was this advisory group that exists. And so I know that she was in Eastern Oregon at one point. I think you pretty much hit
Across the state.
And so it just made me also think of that.
Pendleton,
Yeah.
Portland area, Salem, Kaiser
Right.
area. We got the word
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And encouraging people to apply, I think, as well, was part of that conversation. So,
And I think one of the issues is that you have to have capacity. And if you don't have the capacity, you're not going to go after dollars that you don't have any way of how you're going to meet, what the criteria is. And so capacity building is one of the things that may need to happen. And I think, to the credit of the folks in the Portland metro area, I just need to remind people that this bill came about because the community came together and said, we need to have this, we need to do this. And there was a lot of work that went into it. And what helped to bolster it is the fact that many of the people who supported this were actually in the trenches doing the work. So, I mean, we shouldn't lose sight of that. And if there are statewide organizations who feel that they want to help to develop that capacity in other communities, then they should do that. And I'm glad that the department handled it the way they did. It kind of put me in a position where I'm like, I was real clear from the beginning. The concerns were addressed to ODE, and it needed to be handled the way it did, with their legislative people, looking at what the allegations were and doing the fact-finding to see if they were misinterpreted or inaccurate. And it really took my everything to just kind of sit still and let it play out. And that's why, at one point I was thinking, well, do I need to send something out to the advisory committee? And I'm like, no, this is ODE's responsibility. And so I just want to say that I am pleased with the way in which it was handled. It didn't get messy, which it could have been. It could have been confrontational, and it didn't need to be, at least not with us sitting around the table. And so I was pleased with how it all was addressed. And I'm hoping that as we move forward, we all know that there are Black children in other parts of the state, which is why we wanted to make sure that this advisory group reflected some of the voices from those places. And so I just want to say that I think that as an advisory committee, I think we were committed to what we needed to do to advise the department. And you all know that I would always remind us, we are advisory. We make recommendations. And we have stayed true to that. And we'll continue to stay true to that. Now, what they do with the advice on the other end, that's on them. But our role, and I think we've given some very good, sound advice. And we don't always agree on what we need to be pushing forward, but we tend to get to the point where there's consensus, which is great. And so I just want to say thank you to the advisory group for your active engagement. Yes, Kali.
Ben also had his hand up, so I
No,
want to.
I'll come back.
Okay, go ahead,
Kali.
I've had a couple people ask questions about this, and I'm wondering if there are any talking points that you would like the committee to use if we're asked about this whole thing. I haven't been able to say much because I didn't quite know
Right.
what our line was on this. It would be helpful if there were just 2 or 3 bullet points that you want us to say if people ask us about this.
That's something we can certainly pull out from the information and send to everybody. That would be no problem at all.
Thanks for the question, colleague.
Ben?
Just really just on process, and not the content, which is probably the more important issue, but it was a reminder for me, sort of reading through this, of the complexity of some of the processes that we create. And for good reason. I mean, they're complex for good reason. But you have, of course, a legislative role. You have the State Board of Ed and its role. You've got the department and its staff. You have the advisory committee. And again, it's just a reminder of the need. And I'm thinking about this in terms of some of the work that we lead and support at the HAC, to be continually attempting to clarify who's responsible for what. Because again, I think you said it well, Madam Chair, the role of this advisory group to advise the department, but not to make decisions, for example, about the grant awards. to advise on rules, but not to be the rulemaking body. And those things are important distinctions. And
Right.
I think, again, it was sort of a reminder of the need to sort of continually attempt to clarify, even if we, most of the time, have that in our own mind, because we're at this table, for the public, for stakeholders who maybe, it can be confusing, because it is confusing, right? It's a complicated delineation of responsibilities that have been created here for good reason.
Shel Swan?
So I guess I want to kind of speak to Kali's point. All of these memos, I'm questioning, all these memos are publicly available, yes? So, I mean, my feeling is I don't feel like the advisory group really should have a stance, as a group, except to, refer people
That's
to
right.
the memos. It's like, again, like you said, we're an advisory group, and we are, a diverse set of people. So the advisory group itself doesn't have some one
I agree.
face
I agree.
to come out and say anything. So I mean, I'd say, so far as those things are concerned, I refer you back to, those memos. Now, if you want to talk to me about Shellswap got some opinions, and I'll be happy to tell you. But so far as the advisory group does not, have anything to do with,
Exactly.
the allocation of grants, and, you can take a look at those memos. And beyond that, I've told, because I did speak with the young man, I forget his name right now.
That's a talking point. Like what you're saying could be the talking point, but it's important to have something that we're all saying the same thing. If it is to say, we don't have a opinion about this, we're an advisory group, please refer to the memos, that's fine, but to not have any direction, I've had at least 3 people, one of which is an investor, ask about this, and I have felt sort of lost around a response that's appropriate and representing the group appropriately.
But I think that I agree. I think that's a good discussion to have. So that's my opinion then on what our stance should be. Is as an advisory group, we don't have a particular stance. We don't make the decisions on the grant allocations,
Right.
and you can refer to the memos for that. And I, would suggest to people what I suggested to them before they came out when speaking to the NAACP representative. Come and give public testimony, and and come and share your concerns. Because we, as an advisory group, do represent, our communities in advising ODE. So, come and share your concerns.
Right.
It's great to come and listen, but it's also great to speak and make us aware. So.
Yeah, and I think, Shel, so you raised a good point. All the information is in these documents, and particularly the one where Colt kind of presents what the investigation findings were and his recommendations to the advisory committee. And I personally, even when I ran into advisory members and someone would say, Joyce, what's going on? And I was real clear. There was a letter that was sent that shared that had some concerns. The department did an investigation, and it basically found that there were no things that were out of place in terms of, like we didn't sit on the selection committee. We did not write the RFP, and these were some of the things that were being said. And so I think that as individuals, I'm with you. You want to know what happened? Get in touch with ODE, and they can clarify for you just what the concerns were. And because the concerns were sent to ODE, they weren't sent to me, they weren't sent to you. And I think that keeps it clean. And that minimizes people saying, and Kali, I get your point about some talking points, and maybe the talking point is contact ODE. That could very simply be contact Markeisha. No. But seriously, rather than us having to interpret what we think this is all about, let it come from ODE. And that basically would be my suggestion, and that's what I will do.
All our minutes and everything is online, so
Yeah,
you can read everything.
exactly.
We're also making sure video is up. That was,
Yeah.
so those are going up as well.
I just, my feeling is that I didn't want, and this is just in my role as chair, I didn't want you all stressing about what's being said and what's going on out there. Let the department handle that, because all of that came to them. Now, if that came to us in the form of testimony from people, we'd have that in our minutes. And with the public testimony, we really shouldn't be responding. We just listen. We just listen to what people say when they come. And then if we want to take it up at the next meeting and say, well, we had some testimony and this issue was raised, and we might say to the department, you all need to address this. This is a concern that has been raised. So we just got to be real clear that we don't get in the middle of things that we're not legally responsible for.
FYI, our webpage is updated. So more documents need to be included.
We can do that. We've had just some capacity issues, but we'll make sure that happens.
Yeah.
Been trying to get them up.
Well, we really appreciate you all on the road you've been taking in all this. And one thing we need to probably still make clear, because sometimes I think has been lost in all this paperwork and other things, is that we have a process set up for these next organizations that we want to fund. But we want folks to understand it's still a process they have to go through. I think that some folks almost think automatically money is just going to be given here, without them going through a process. And I don't want that to happen at all. And I don't think either of us do. So we still have that process in place.
And I think to add to that, so the grantees that were previously funded, that were refunded this time, had to do plans in the same way, they had to do updated grant agreements and updated plans in the same way that, anyone would if they were part of this process. And so I think that was also something we wanted to make clear, that we weren't just, here you go, right? There was actually some submission and some talk about what was there and what they were doing differently. I had several phone conversations with people to get a sense of what was going to be happening as they were moving into kind of a second phase of this. So that was conversation that was taking place as well.
Any other comments?
Comments, thoughts, questions? Okay, I have the video piece. I think it would be interesting to hear from Charles Martinez and the state board, but maybe we could take a little break so that I can kind
We
of
can
get
set it up.
technology working.
How much
Is that
time? 10 minutes?
10 minutes should be fine.
10
Is that
minutes.
okay with everybody? Okay.
Okay, y'all ready? Calling the meeting back to order. Markeisha is still looking for the right link. So we're going to just go ahead and move to the agenda item that has school and community updates. We started doing that. We go around the room and people would share any information that they thought this committee should know about. And so I'm going to open up the floor for anybody who wants to share information about what's going on. Cynthia, I know you got something to share. Yes.
Madam Chair and committee, I am proud of the work that Salem Kaiser continues to do in the Office of Student Equity, Access, and Advancement. We hosted in October our first parent-student community gathering. We had over 300 people to attend. And we gave people the opportunity to share their concerns with us and possible solutions. We've analyzed all of that information, and now we are ready to give them that information.
Right.
I have a planning meeting this Monday from 6:30 to 8:30 at Lancaster Professional Center. If any of you'd like to come, review those results. And we're planning the next parent-student community gathering for Tuesday, March 6th. It'll be from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. And basically, we will share those results. We will share proposals to address those concerns and give people in the community an opportunity to become part of action groups and help us to resolve some of the issues.
What time is that March 6th meeting?
6:30 to 8:30.
Okay.
It'll be at Chemeketa Community College in Building 2.
Okay, we will make sure that that gets sent out.
Thank you very
Okay,
much.
Let me add to that, is that, we went, my wife and I went, because we helped facilitate some of the sessions. And I said, okay, I don't know how many people come out usually in Salem. I said, well, maybe about 30 people will be there or something like that. Went in there and the room was so full, we didn't have enough space. We had to have little areas off in 2 or 3 different areas just to facilitate.
That's great. That's
It was
great.
that good. So she's talking about trying to grow it. Where are you gonna have the next meeting?
It's gonna be at Chemeketa, but we've gotten another building so we can have breakout rooms.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
And Cynthia, where did you say the Monday meeting is?
At LPC, Lancaster Professional Center, 4500 Lancaster Drive Northeast. It's where my office is located. You can come visit me anytime. And that's gonna be 6:30 to 8:30. I have all the results compiled. We'll break out into groups and determine what topics we will look at March 6th and give you all assignments to assist with the facilitation of the event.
And I want to just say, that's one of the things that I do, and I'd be more than happy in my role as Community Engagement Manager for Education Northwest. I will volunteer to come down and help you out.
Wonderful. We'd
I'd love to
have
do
you.
that. Okay.
I'll make sure I email you the results so you can give us
Okay.
input on making sure we
Absolutely.
have everything in place
Absolutely.
for March 6th.
No problem.
Okay?
Could we
Thank you.
all see those results?
I
I'd love to
can.
see
Can I
them.
send them to you, Markeisha?
You sure can.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thanks.
We'll get
Great.
them out.
Wonderful. Anyone else want to share? Any up? Reginald?
As you know, we've been working hard at Warner Pacific. We've just switched in from a college to a university.
Oh,
So
great.
we're now Warner Pacific University, which is real great. And it's a lot of the programming, the new programs we're offering, MBA program, we'll probably have an EDD program somewhere in the
Oh,
future.
wonderful.
We have RN to BSN, working on seeing what we can do about a full BSN program. So that's in the initial stages. And a lot of partnerships with community colleges and high schools to grow your own teachers, nurses, healthcare, those types of things, reaching in to high schools as much as we can to grow. We also reduced while most colleges and universities are raising their tuition, we reduced our tuition by 24%. And that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because, it's a big deal because we just want to open the pathways a little wider for more people to access higher ed. So even though things are trending up in other places, we have made a decision to cut our tuition by 24%. Wow. We have 65% students of color at Warner Pacific University, and 35% of our faculty and staff are of color. So we're serious about entering into the diversity frame. On a variety of levels, and it's not just people for brochures.
Right, right.
Nobody-
I like that.
Nobody cares about that. It's about really engaging in a deep level to make sure that our curriculum is culturally, and our faculty are culturally competent, and just doing a variety of things to make sure that we are all that we say we want to be. So, that's exciting.
That's wonderful.
That's why I missed meetings, you guys. It's just keep me busy.
Anyone else?
We have our 12th Annual African American Youth Leadership Conference that will be hosted at OSU April 11th. So that's for
Of
Lynn,
March?
Benton, Lincoln,
March?
April.
Oh, April?
Lynn, Benton, Lincoln, and Lane counties. We usually have upwards of 400 Black kids attending. I don't have the date yet for the Salem Kaiser one, but that one will be coming
It's
up as
May
well.
24th.
Where is it?
May 24th at Carbon University.
Oh, okay. Great. Anyone else? Well, I just want to share some information with you. How many of you are familiar with this whole concept called the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences? Well, one of the leading people who does research and practice around that is Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. And if you want to find out more and just hear her, she has a TED Talk. But someone sent me an article last week, and in the article it mentioned that she had this new book out. So I went on a quick search. B&M didn't have it, so I went to Powell's, and I called them, and the lady said, well, the book won't be out until next week, which this past week. She said, but she'll be here. I said, when? She said, Monday. So she will be at Powell's Books on Monday, February 5th. If you can make it there, she's a pediatrician, but she's an incredible researcher. And we actually have seen her when we went to the White House conference in 2015, and she was the keynote speaker. And she's done incredible work. And this last piece that I have, and I'll forward this article to you, because what they're looking at is the impact of these adverse childhood experiences have on people as they become adults, and particularly as it relates to health, asthma, diabetes, hypertension. And you can they have like a little test where you get scored, as you were growing up. Was there divorce in the family? Was there domestic violence? Did anybody in your family get incarcerated? All of the things many of our children, and not just Black children, experience. And that's stuff that people who work with kids, they need to be aware of that. I've always been concerned, when you would have a child in your classroom and they had a death in the family. And then they come to school because the family, they don't want the child around where they're talking about, what happened to so-and-so and how they're going to bury him. So they send the child to school. And what they don't do is sometimes they'll let the teacher know and let the principal, but sometimes they don't. And so you have a kid come to school and, they're 6 years old and they got all this on their heart. They're going to be disengaged. They'll behave in some ways that their little minds are trying to cope with it. So if you get a chance, if you can't go see her, get the book, go online, listen to her TED Talk. And she is dynamic, believe it. She is really dynamic. So I just wanted to share that. I've been sharing it with everybody since I got my book yesterday, and I could do, like show and tell. And I'll pass this around.
What time will she be there?
7:30. Yeah, 7:30. And I talked to Jeanette Pye Espinosa at the Crittenden Foundation, which sponsored the conference. There was a conference in D.C. in October, and Nadine was one of the speakers. And somebody in our office told me that they believe that she's going to be back in this area in April in Wilsonville. So I got to find out I haven't talked to Jeanette, because I think we're going to try to see if we can do something with her. But she's incredible. Yes, Arlene.
There's a youth summit this weekend, Saturday,
Mhm.
in Portland. You can get more information at youthpdx.org. It's from 11 to 4. And so just let folks know to spread the word on that.
And this is Black History Month. So there are a number of things going on during Black History Month. SEI has a whole list of things that they are doing. And on February 24th, they're bringing out Jamel Hill, who anchors at ESPN. Yeah, they were trying to fire her. But anyway, she's still there. And Renee Watson co-authored a book with Malcolm X's daughter. And we're going to bring Malcolm's daughter out. We've been pulling together the resources to bring her out. Then I got a call 2 days ago saying that her agent had double booked her and she's going to be in Detroit, because we were going to do that on February 24th as well. But Renee will still be here, and she's going to do like a mother-daughter sister tea at the North Portland Branch Library on February 24th from 1 to 3 p.m. And the first 50 under 18-year-old girls who show up will get a free signed copy of the book. So, yeah, there are a lot of things going on, What you say, Bobby? You gonna bring somebody so you can get a book?
Every day.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, there's, a first for me that I'm going to try to do and bring some of my young people to see are some of the films and
Yes.
the Cascade African American Film Festival.
Yes.
And I scour that website because, I'm cheap. And they free. So I look multiple times, multiple listings. So,
They got some good
and have
ones.
some community stuff, some social times, and some workshops on the Saturday matinees.
Yes.
So might check those out and bring some young people, because I guess the really awesome part about it, I guess, is there are African films made by, African directors. So, so some of them obviously are in different languages, but, it's
They're
something other than a Europeanized version of what, countries in Africa look like.
Are you guys talking?
Hello?
Well, are you talking about the African Film Festival?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned that it kicks off today?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it kicks off today.
There's a film tonight, and there's two tomorrow, two different
Right.
ones
There's a
tomorrow.
film festival at the Hollywood Theater. It's a Nigerian film. Yeah. PCC is a big sponsor and supporter of that. It was incubated, I think.
That's where it started, at PCC.
So all these movies are in
Yeah.
Portland.
Now, kids have this.
And if you go on HollywoodTheater.org, they list them and you can buy your tickets in advance because a lot of those movies sell out. There are a number of movies shown there and at Cascade, at the Cascade campus.
Carly, are they bringing out any other filmmakers? I thought someone said they were.
I don't know if they're bringing out the filmmaker. I can find out and send an email to Markeisha if people have a particular interest in meeting filmmakers.
Yes.
But they're great movies.
They
are.
Yes.
Every year.
They will be bringing them out. I see,
Who are they bringing
yes,
out?
Izu Ojukwu is going to be there. He's award-winning Nigerian film director and producer. Izu will present opening night tonight.
Tonight.
6 o'clock. So, and it's AfricanFilmFestival.org.
Is it going to be at McMenamins?
It's going to be at the Hollywood Theater.
At the Hollywood Theater, okay.
4122 Northeast Sandy.
Right. Okay. Okay.
A printout that I can pass around.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Markeisha, you got the.
We're just gonna keep going through till we get the
Hey, Mark. Yes.
I just want to make mention that we will be hosting this Black Male Challenge for the Beacon School District on March 9th at the Health and Science School there out there in Beaverton from 9 to 2. All are welcome to attend. It's always important that we convene our young Black boys to really kind of have that community support to elevate their value and social capital. And also, I'm a proud cousin of Renee Watson. So I'm glad to be here for this month.
She sure will. She'll be on a book tour. And I didn't mention the title of the book. It's called Betty Before X. So it's the early childhood experiences of Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's wife. Betty Before X. Yes, Lori.
Hi, this is Lillian, this is Lillian. So outside of my work with the Early Learning Division, I'm a board member for the Oregon Black Pioneers.
Yes.
And at the Oregon Historical Society, we just released our newest installation there, Raising Change. It's looking at the Oregon Civil Rights Movement. That's centered around like kind of the Portland metro area. So it's a really great exhibit, and there's multiple events from now until I believe June 15th. And these particular events are free. So there's History Club events. There's an event that we're doing in conjunction with the Portland Art Museum that's centered around children. So a lot of great events and really highlighting the African American experience and the civil rights movement and the points of intersectionality. And I do know that Ms. Joyce is featured in there, along as Ron Herman as well.
Yeah,
so, and many
I haven't
other,
been yet.
Important civil rights figures and icons within the Portland or within the state of Oregon. So.
Thank you for the shout out. I will get down there. Yes.
The Oregon Education Association puts on an education symposium every year. And to your point about the ACEs issue and trauma,
Yes.
That is the topic of our February 24th symposium, which we held at the Embassy Suites in Washington Square on February 24th from 9 to 2. And it is all about the toxic stress brought on by complex trauma and the developing brain. And so we have 3 speakers who will be there leading that symposium, and you're welcome to join us.
Right. Ben?
It's hard to follow all those great community updates. Mine's very sort of Salem capital legislative focus, but I did want to mention it because I think could be of some interest to this group. But we are again, the HAC, the agency I lead, is again requesting funding for our diversity, equity, and inclusion position. This is a position that we've attempted to create. We were able to fund Cheryl Myers in that role for a while before we were again unsuccessful in getting permanent funding, and she's now working with the Chief Education Office and ODE on some of the educator advancement work. But we're hopeful that we can eventually, and potentially as early as this February, get permanent funding for the position. And just to put it in some context, we're an agency of a little over 100 folks with administering over $2 billion biennially of funding for post-secondary education, with a large set of responsibilities for program approvals and coordinating pathways for students and grant making to promote student success, and a whole bunch of operating, administering scholarship and grant programs. And we have no positions dedicated to equity. Now we do our best to thread equity into the work of all of our staff, and have some initiatives underway internally and externally that focus on it. But it's hard to do without leadership staff that is dedicated by job title and job description to that work. And so we've continued to elevate it as a priority. The governor and her office have been supportive. We're hopeful that we will, this time around, get support across the street for what is just a very small ask.
Because I'm multitasking. Can you let everyone know? Yes, please, thank you.
Kali,
We can hear you.
mute yourself, please.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's classic.
He's having a situation, Kylie.
I thought she was just vocalizing her enthusiasm for our legislative request.
That was funny.
So, are you done?
I am, thank you.
Kali put the.
No, I was.
So, how many of you regularly read or get copies of Teaching Tolerance?
Oh,
Okay.
I feel like I was
So
in school.
I would like to suggest that all of us keep touch bases with this magazine. You can go online and get it, sign up. You can get free materials, videos, and you can share them with the people that you work with. This particular issue really caught my attention because it's called Teaching Hard History. And there's a whole curriculum on teaching slavery. And the resource pages are, it's about 10 of them. And you can click on and you can download documents. It is amazing. The other thing that I came upon about a week or two ago, they have a whole unit on lynching. It's called An Outrage. Now, how many times do kids really learn about lynching? And if you go online, there's actually, I think it's a video, or is it a slide? But anyway, you can click on it, and then there's materials that go with it. So these are the kind of things like, if we are on an African American Black Student Success Plan, we need to be well versed in the things that are out there. So if someone were to approach us, we can say, hey, there's this new thing that you really need to take a look at. But this one here, I downloaded the curriculum yesterday, and I'm just totally fascinated with it. And then the outrage one, well, that was emotional, because years ago I went down to was in Atlanta, and there was a traveling exhibit on lynching based on this book that this man did, where he kind of looked at the lynchings that had happened and told the stories. And they had an exhibit that would just, it was very gripping. And kids need to know, because the reality is we've had instances of lynching in contemporary times. So,
Dr. T, did you want to share your,
okay.
you wanted to share your Black History Month
Uh,
or not?
She asked me to share. See, I don't know if it's open to the public, but I received an email the other day from the Port of Portland, where they're having the Black History Month celebration, and they're celebrating first African-American woman police chief, the first African-American woman senator, Jay Vale, the first Supreme Court justice, and then myself as being the first African-American on the Port Commission. So that's February 28th, but I don't even know if it's open to the public. I've asked them a couple of times. I was on the Port of Portland commissioner in 1991 and 1993. So that goes back a while, when I was about 10 years old.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And speaking of the first Black female police chief, her swearing in was last week.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal. It was very much pomp and circumstance, the bagpipes, the honor guard, and what just really just hit my soul, the brother who played on Grimm, Russell Hornsby, he was the MC. Him and the chief went to high school together, so he flew up from California to be the MC. Carmen Sylvester, who was the first Black female police officer in the Bureau, swore her in. It was at the Oregon Historical Society, and the chief said she intentionally selected that venue because of the Black History exhibit that Lillian was just talking about. The place was standing room only. I mean, people were here from all over the country, people from the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, they were here. Because it was quite a historic event. And so we've got a lot of things going on. There's the new president of Linfield College is Dr. Miles K. Davis, African American. Yeah, that just came. Linfield, Linfield, yes.
I know.
Yes. Yes. And then we have Dr. Marvin Lynn is the Dean of the Graduate School of Education at Portland State. He's a phenomenal researcher. He's a critical race theory specialist. We have, there are two other deans, African-American deans, that have been hired at Portland State. And I'm sharing this with you because I think it's important for you to know. So you can maybe connect with those people.
There's an African-American woman who's the new dean at University of Oregon Law School.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And there's somebody else. I can't remember who it is. But those are things that I think we need to know. I mean, because like it or not, you being on this advisory committee makes you a resource. You become a resource to communities throughout the state. And I think that's really important. And I'm hoping that as we kind of move into this next phase of our work, that we begin to identify opportunities for us to be present and to show up participating in things as members of the African American Black Student Success Advisory Group. I think that's really important. Okay, you got it?
Fine.
I done ad-libbed
Yeah,
for so
no,
long.
that's okay.
Yes, okay.
Announcements are still coming in, so it's all good.
Renee?
On February 5th, OEA is raising the issue of disrupted learning, and there's going to be a lobby day. And as a sub, when I go in, the disrupted learning is, well, it's there. And our students are suffering for it. We have students that are very bright, and if you have disrupted learning in the class, the teacher has to keep stopping, and you know, I know I'm a sub, and sometimes the students don't act the same, but then I ask the teachers, okay, does this happen every day? So I do ask, and it's affecting our kids. So that's just another issue I wanted to bring up.
Thank you.
So they're sharing their stories on February 5th.
We actually are asking for a task force, and the governor's office and the chief education officer are working with us on this to figure out, I mean, this isn't something that's easy to solve, but it's a crisis all over the state. We're hearing about it. And it's tied to the ACES score issue.
Absolutely.
Very much. They say now that, I don't know how they have figured this out, but they say that their estimate is that 2/3 of students score for a score of 4 or higher in our Oregon schools.
And as I was talking to an adult, and this adult was not an adult of color, and they shared with me that they did the ACES thing, and their ACES score was like 5, which is pretty high. And I often think about, you know, looking at our teenagers, looking at our adults, and how those experiences, and we know they do affect you lifelong. And so that's something that I think is real important. It's a very, I don't want to say exciting, but it's a very important piece of work. And I think it's a missing piece that particularly people who work with children, either as educators, as healthcare providers, as coaches, need to kind of be familiar with and understand. Okay, now, did you want to say something?
No, yeah,
Frank?
no, I'm familiar,
Yeah. That's right, 'cause this is
thinking
your-
about the ACES work.
I don't want to
The Tillamook School District has made a commitment to be a trauma-informed system.
Right.
And so they've been, you know, some of the work that my agency does is with the Tillamook School District. And they have, so what you're talking about in relation to the people who are
This is
working
what
with
I'm
it.
Actually, no.
Is something that they're, you know, I know they've spent a lot of time, they brought in the person who actually, who did the initial work on the ACES study last year to sort of kick off their process. That's important work. And that's not necessarily something that all of the educational staff have bought into.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think what's been communicated is this is where the district is going. If this is not something you feel you can work with, then we need to make some changes.
Yes, that's great. So, you know, what Frank just mentioned just reminds me of how many resources we have sitting around this table. And I would like to make a recommendation to our advisory committee that we intentionally engage each other to do maybe a little 15-minute presentation at our meetings, because I would love to hear more about the work that you're doing in Tillamook. And so I want to make that as a recommendation. Can I get a second or a motion, or whatever you have to do?
Any motion?
You just said.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. But I think that it's important because everybody sitting around this table.
Can I say one thing real quick?
Sure.
Obviously, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes. Loud and clear.
So Kairos is obviously very involved in trauma-informed work. One thing I want to point out that I think this committee can help emphasize, the ACES study, the original ACES study tested very few African Americans. It was mostly testing white
Sure,
people. So
sure.
the impact of race and racism is actually not even taken into account in the original ACES study.
Right.
And so I think there needs to be more to tell the
But
story of
that's
how
Kendra.
racism and all of the things that I think our community has to face, how to add trauma to the experience of children has to be part of the story. And Philadelphia and some other cities have been starting to do more research or producing more research that deals with the racism element, but I think that's really important because all I hear is ACEs, and ACEs was mostly white and mostly male children, and it does not tell the whole story about what's happening in our children.
Kids, right?
Does that make sense?
But I think what we heard when we were in DC, Kendra, go
Well,
ahead.
and that's what Dr. Bert Harris's mission is, to really
Yes.
get the word out about the impact of trauma on our children.
Right.
And just calling that out, because that ACES
Yeah.
study was done in San Diego.
Yes.
The majority of the recipients had health care. It was done through Kaiser. So it was
Right.
a very
Right.
skewed, I mean,
Right.
I'm not saying that it wasn't
Yeah.
valid, but it was a very concentrated group of individuals that participated, and they didn't look like us.
Right.
That's why.
But I do think, I'm saying this more in the circles that I'm in, but I think for all of us to just remind people and talk about Dr. Berg. So that's the person coming to Powell, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. She'll be there Monday.
Because people aren't aware, and I think it's an important part of the story.
Well, I'll be honest with you, for me, that is the story. Because, like I said, Kendra and I were at the White House conference that the Crittenden Foundation did, and she was the keynote speaker. And
And it was the impact of
And-
trauma on girls of color.
girls of color,
Just
yeah.
looking at where girls of color are falling in, the disproportionality, incarceration, et cetera.
Right.
Achievement.
Yep. Okay, so, Kali, do you want to add anything else? Okay, so I'm going to.
No, I think that's it. I mean, I could add a lot, but.
Well, no, We need you to put together a little mini presentation for us when you come to the next meeting. Okay?
Oh, okay.
See?
She's like, wait a minute.
Yeah, she had to think about that.
I was like, what?
Yeah. But no, I mean, when we talked about, last June, we were talking about the need to continue to meet. One of the things that we said is that we are resources and we have information. I'm looking forward to Cynthia sharing the information that she's, based on the work she's done in her district. And as we move out and talk to districts and people that we know in education, we can say, you need to get in touch with one of our advisory committee members who's started some work in the Salem-Keizer School District. That, to me, is how we leverage our resources, our expertise, and all of that. So I am going to turn it over to Markeisha, who has a movie for us.
I have a movie. I don't know, not a movie, but just a portion of the state board movie. Look, the state board meeting from January 18th, where we had the OARs passed. But I think what's important for Dr. T and I, for you all to hear from our perspective, is the comments that were made by Charles Martinez, who's the chair of a state board. Colt was there as well. It was really helpful to have Mr. Russell, George Russell, who's not here today, but has been a member of this group since the beginning, because he actually was able to provide some context that I had forgotten about, right? And so I think that was very important in kind of thinking about the information that we had from the letter and the response. Like, all of that has been, brewing in anticipation even of this day and the passing of those OARs. So I think it's important just to kind of get a sense of what that was like. So I'm ready to be back on the video, and you're probably going to have to turn. Will it be on here and here, Haley? Okay. I'm plugged in. It's up.
Are you sharing your screen with the GoTo people?
Carly and Lillian, are you on GoTo or just phone?
I'm on the phone.
I'm on GoTo, but I don't see anything coming up.
Okay, I'm going to share it now. Okay, so those that are just listening to audio, I'll make sure to send you the link so you can just kind of listen to the comments. Lillian, can you see it now?
I can see it now.
Okay, so here we go.
Hi. How you doing, Markeisha?
Well.
Okay.
Who's going to be joining me as well? Sorry, we were trying to make sure our time was correct. It's always some.
On television, on the computer.
Here we go.
And moving a little bit faster than I could. Good morning. For the record, my name is Daryl Takufu. I'm Assistant Superintendent for the department, and I'm with the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. I'm pleased that even with some delay, as you said, we're still good morning.
Feedback from the phone.
So who needs to mute themselves? Cynthia, maybe?
Everybody on the phone, mute yourselves, please.
Okay, let me try it again.
You're going to have to move back because I can't see. Thank you.
I'm pleased that even with some delay, while we did the important work of responding to stakeholders, that we can come before you today and move forward. Delay is not really bad because in my early morning meetings, in fact, this morning, I read that delay is the way you gain patience.
Are your speakers too close?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Oh, that thing there.
Maybe you turn your mic off.
Let's see.
Turn the mic off.
Oh, that may have done it.
I think actually the mic is interfering with.
Yeah.
I think that did it.
Was that it? Okay, let's try again.
Particularly when you know you are doing the right thing. Your vote today will allow us to do something we believe all would support. That is expansion of this program beyond the current 9 school districts, 21 schools, mainly impacting the Portland metro area, but also inclusive of Yamhill, Polk, and Lane counties. Our director, Dr. Markeisha Smith, will now proceed with the OARs.
Okay, so Markeisha Smith, for the record, director for our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And so what you have before you is basically some of the changes that we've made to the OARs based on public testimony, based on our new RFA that was posted back in September. So we took that feedback very seriously, consulted with folks here within the department to make sure that we were really expanding it in such a way that the language would be inclusive of really what we're wanting to do in terms of making this available across the state of Oregon. And so very quickly, I'll just kind of walk you through some of the changes that were made. One of the things that we had a lot of discussion about was how we were defining African American. And so we had some discussion within our advisory group about that. And really, they landed on wanting to make sure that students could have the ability to self-identify as African American. There was a lot of discussion about that, and we had offered some ways in which to expand that definition, but we wanted to also honor the ability of students, families, to be able to self-identify. And so there was a lot of good conversation around that. So you'll see that change was made. We talked a lot about the culturally specific organization, and so that's something we fleshed out. We used some research from United Way. They have some good language around that, as well as some of our community-based organizations here in the state of Oregon. And so we were able to really flesh out what that meant and to distinguish that some from community-based organization. And so while a culturally specific organization could be categorized as a community-based organization, the focus of what's happening with a culturally specific organization is very targeted, right? They're looking at some specific needs of community, and particularly the community in which they may be situated and serve. We also had some discussion from some outside feedback around how we were qualifying what a nonprofit organization meant and what that really looked like. And so making sure that we were also saying that 501c4s or social welfare organizations would be eligible to apply for funds. We realized in the first round that it actually sort of prohibited some organizations that define themselves that way from being able to apply for funds. So there was some expansion in the language there. Under the establishment, one of the major differences you'll see is that we actually completed our African American Black Student Success Plan in July of last year. And so we were able to pull in language from the plan to really align it with what's happening here in the OARs. And so those indicators is what you'll see under establishment. And it was, I think, a good decision to really pull that out. We had it very focused to 3 areas in the first round of OARs, and that was really based on timing and kind of, trying to get funds out the door. And so this time we were able to really, inclusive of those 3, expand this to really talk about the 14 indicators that are a part of the larger plan itself. Just quickly, some around eligibility. So we talked some there about serving the population and or number of African American and Black students as determined by Oregon Department of Education. So those numbers fluctuate, and so making sure that we are keeping track of that in terms of our data and looking at student populations across the state. We talked some about partnership. That's been a very important part of what's happened even in the first round of these grants. We were able to really see some establishment, some expansion of partnerships with organizations that were awarded funds in the first round. And so we wanted to make sure that we were calling that out more specifically and actually valuing what it means when you have culturally specific organizations, community-based organizations that are partnering with school districts, ESDs, with institutions of higher learning, really making sure that that was something that we were honoring and valuing, as we know that the work that our CBOs and culturally specific organizations are doing with students, youth, families, community really is at the pulse of a lot of this work, but they can't do that, without partnership, right? And likewise, and so we called that out very specifically. And then the final area where you'll notice some changes is around criteria. And really in criteria, it was making sure that we were really focusing in on that geographic location, that geographic representation, and also language around, so yes, geographic location, but one of the things we realized is that there also may be a lack of sufficient services in some areas. And so, for instance, even though we have, geographically thinking about like Washington County, right, sort of being close to Portland Metro, we've also realized in this last year and a half, 2 years, that there are some areas that have a lack of sufficient services. And so we wanted to make sure that that was something that was evident here in the language of the OARs. And also that commitment and readiness to do this work around being culturally responsive in programming, and some evidence of some things that have happened before in terms of looking at services and programming to close opportunity gaps for African American and Black students. So those are kind of the highlights of the areas that you'll notice differences in from the first round of OARs that were adopted back in April, actually, I think, of 2016. So we've come a long way. So I will pause there and.
Okay. Colt, did you want to say anything in general about this? We have had a fair amount of community engagement, and including some concerns expressed by community. Do you want to share?
Sure. Yeah, I can share a bit. And first, thank the team here, because both Dr. Smith and Tukufu have done a pretty outstanding job of trying to address the concerns along the way, and taking time to meet with different organizations to try to meet the needs of folks that have raised concerns. So we have had, and most of you have received at least some of the communications, both from the department and from some NAACP leadership from the Portland area, from Salem Kaiser, Corvallis, and Eugene Springfield. And this has been the folks that have brought primarily the concerns that have reached me, at least. I'm not sure if there are others that have reached our staff. And the biggest concern has been around distribution of funds geographically, and the refunding of the original 4 grant recipients. And so if you've had opportunity to look at the response, we did have legal staff from the Department of Education that were not involved in any part of the process. In fact, were not a part of the department when those processes took place, review the process and determine that the engagement of the advisory group was appropriate, which I think we also made it clear that the advisory group also was not involved in the selection of the grantees, that the documented comments of Speaker Kotek around the intent of the expanded funding was to continue the same 4 programs, to learn from those and determine whether they were effective or not effective, and if they are effective, how we can spread them around the state of Oregon. But that also that there be a smaller amount available to distribute geographically across the state and learn about programs that could be effective in smaller communities across Oregon. We did share some information in the memo to the NAACP leadership regarding the percentage of our students who, again, self-identify as Black or African American, and that percentage is 80% in the Portland metro area. For this new biennia, about 90% of the funds are dedicated to these 4 continuing grantees. Most of, I believe 3 of those grantees do serve only the Portland metro area, and 1 of them serves some students in the Portland metro area, some in Yamhill, some in Polk, and some in Lane County. So we aren't very far off of the geographic distribution right now in following this legislative intent. I think we can make further improvements, and really what I would like to have us spend most of our time on is determining whether these programs are working, these 4 and the other 3 to 6 or whatever that we'll be able to distribute through these regionalized programs, so that we can go back to the legislature and say, here are the concerns we have for the success of our African American and Black students in the state of Oregon. Here are programs that we've had in place, the successes and the failures we've seen with those, and we would like to propose greater investments or, as important, changes to our practices statewide. So we need to be learning about these, both how to invest, but how to change practices and policies statewide to impact all of our students. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Smith and Takufu and see if I've left anything out that's
I think
critical.
that covers it well. I just will say, being, and Dr. Takufu is coming in sort of, at the tail end of us closing out the first year of funding, that, we definitely stand behind the process that happened. And I think that we've been very transparent about what what transpired, and what has, conversations have been in the advisory group. And so I think that's been really important, and being transparent, being very open about, how this happened. And with that, learning from this first round and knowing how to improve upon things that might not have gone the way we wanted them to. And so I think that's, the lessons learned in that, and that we know that there are African American and Black students in places in Oregon other than the Portland Metro. And it really is our intention to make sure that as we're growing this, that we have that geographic representation and support that we know is needed. So
I just wanted to echo a couple things. I see George's hand up. One is Colt's reference, and I heard Markeisha references to the sort of intent, legislative intent. I think this has been my own personal perspective about this. I was frustrated in the first round in terms of the geographic spread, the number of awards, other kinds of things in terms of how they were administered, and shared frustration. I think some that we've heard from constituents about the same issue, who counts, how are the dollars being administered, and those are big issues. However, the legislative intent is clear, and the process underneath that, whether we agree or disagree personally, I think the process underneath execution of that intent is been very well done. So I have strong personal feelings about what's at stake here, and I think I know that the board shares this, and this may not have been what you invented or would want to create, but this is a precious resource, and under the constraints of what legislative intent is, I'm really confident personally in the process. I have said before, and I guess I'm going to put this back to the board. In some ways, it's outside of our action on this, but I have expressed to this board and to Colt my concern about the point that Colt ended up with, which is how do we communicate from these kinds of innovations what's really working and not working. There's an expectation that grantees report performance data, and implicit in that is the potential that if the grantees are not performing, that it could change the funding. The likelihood that happens, however, seems pretty low to me, and actually the likelihood that it becomes visible, what we really can learn, seems low to me without a mechanism to do that. And so I'm not just saying this as as just a statement for the air. I would like the board to consider pressing ODE to develop behind these awards a much more formal mechanism to share what we learn from this. And it might be an investment in some kind of a summit involving awardees, community stakeholders, where grantees are not just sharing where it's convenient what they've learned, but we're sharing in a much more visible way and really inviting the state into the conversation. What's at stake for our students is so profound. I don't think we can afford to treat this like we typically do with these kind of innovation grants. So I don't think it interferes with our action, but I think I would appreciate if board members share a version of this sentiment, that we would formally ask ODE to work with the Office and Equity and with broader stakeholders to really create a formal mechanism. I know that there's dollar signs attached to that, but I can't think of something more important for these kinds of investments to actually show what we can learn and how we might scale them. The lessons of what doesn't work are just as important as the lessons of what does work. So I want to put that out there in a more formal way. I've expressed this sentiment before, but and I know it's sentiment that many of us share, but without pressing action, I'm not confident that we're actually going to be able to do that. So I just want to put that out in terms of something this continues to be an issue for me. And if there is sentiment, I'd like to hear from the board so that it goes back to OD and that Colt and I and along with staff can take that on. George?
So I want to, as a member of the African American Black Student Success Advisory Committee, who's been involved from the beginning, I want to at least speak about several things related to the process. And I want to thank Markeisha for the work that she's done with it. Folks should know that, first of all, there was, and I'll say I, because I did do this, expressed some concerns even originally that I thought that the group was Portland-centric. But I also recognize that the majority, substantial majority of African-American students, identified African-American students in this state are in the Portland metro area. And even when I saw the data you provided, I did not know it was that much. It also happens that most of the community-based organizations that serve African-American community and African-American students and young people are also in the Portland metro area. Now, within the committee, we had conversation about this.
That's right.
And you should know that the original criteria for receiving the funding changed as a result of the conversation in the committee, because the original language did include that in order to even be eligible, you had to have, as a district, at least 5% African-American students.
That's right.
Which would have precluded almost every district outside of the Portland metro area. So we made some adjustments which would have allowed for a broader inclusion. We didn't get as specific as what you're doing now. And I have to say, and I'll just go on the record for this, I personally don't believe in a pro rata distribution. Because part of the intent was, I believe, to either have demo or pilot projects that could be looked at their success in working with African-American students, and then talk about what could be replicated and what would make sense that we learned from a project in Portland, working with predominantly African-American students, could be replicated in Ashland or Baker or Lowell or some of those places for the small numbers of African-American students that are in those school districts. And trust me, there are African-American students in some of those very small school districts. So the process was one that was democratic, a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion, going back and forth, and in many cases, sometimes feeling like beating a dead horse. But what we ended up with, I think the overwhelming majority of the committee felt like, okay, for a first round, for where we're starting, this is a good place. There isn't enough money to do everything. Let's make sure that there's enough money to do whatever we do right, and that we can see some results as a result of having an evaluation that shows what can be working elsewhere and so forth, and that there be enough resources available to see some impact. Now, we can get into an argument about whether we're seeing that or not. I've sat in those meetings and heard superintendents and staff from the districts, not the contractors, and they're really CBOEs, who happen to become contractors once they get dollars, but from the school districts about what kind of success they believe, maybe anecdotal, that they're seeing in terms of some of the key criteria that we have addressed as being important to see success for African-American students. And I've heard those superintendents and staff say, we're seeing these kinds of difference, and for us, for our school district, it's having an impact. So I wanted to say that. I also was in the meeting where Speaker Kotek made it very clear that it was her intent and expectation that the CBOs, the organizations and programs that had already been funded under the initial dollars, would be able to continue so that there's at least some continuity in terms of the flow of projects. And those of you who are educators in this room know that one of the things we do in education is to put some money in a project, we start it, and then a year later or 2 years later, before we have any chance to really see what kind of results there are, the money's gone. And the committee did not want to see that happen. So there was some concern that we make sure we don't too quickly start taking money away and trying to spread it everywhere. So, and I understand the concerns of the NAACP. I've talked with NAACP and President in Eugene. I've also talked with Benny and Salem. I don't know what where the Oregon, the Portland.
No, I talked to
position
Benny.
is at this point, but I'm at this point ready to move on and get this going.
Did you want to say anything about this press that I put on the table in terms of?
I support it.
Kimberly.
Chair Martinez, I also support what you've said, and I think that where I come down on that is that it wasn't just about geographic inequity, right? There were a lot of smaller, culturally specific organizations within the Portland metro area that felt excluded from the dollars. There were individuals who do have individual practice in creating programs and projects to get the outcomes that we want for our African American and Black students, and those individuals also felt excluded from the process. And so one of the reasons that I am supportive of what Chair Martinez was talking about in terms of a summit or communities of practice, learning communities that come from this work, that there are regular reports, not just so that we can hear about it, but so that all of these organizations and all of the individuals that are doing this work, not just the ones that are the most visible and have the longest track record of quote unquote culturally specific work, have the opportunity to have their voices heard in the work, and all of it is for the good of the student. And I'm continually hearing that process is much more important than throwing a project or a program at the problem. We need to work through a process that is important, that is not important, but that is relevant to the community that it is serving, and let that community come up with the solutions, and that there's a continuous loop of improvement, and continuously asking questions, continuously moving forward, so that there's continuously learning in the process. But if we just come up with a bright, shiny object that is a really cool program and then just throw it at the students, we're just going to keep having these little incremental changes. And what we really need is transformation. So that's why I'm supportive of this idea of really sort of having the reporting, having the data, but also having the conversations and the opportunities of sharing that information and working together collectively, not just the organizations that got the funding.
We hear you loud and clearly. I've been here a short period of time. I agree with your sentiment. Totally.
One thing I did want to suggest, I really agree with George's earlier comments in terms of just a simple pro rata distribution is also not necessarily an elegant solution. But I do want to also say that the context of what goes on for African American students and other vulnerable populations where they don't have critical mass in more rural communities is very different. And I do think there are things we can learn about services that are indigenous in those communities when you don't have critical mass, and there aren't that many African American families and students that are really important. And I'm not sure that what we can learn in Metro Portland necessarily translates in those more rural contexts. So I do think there are things that we can learn, but I do agree with the general sentiment that you described. So I want to get Anthony next because his hand is being raised in the queue, and then I'll come back to Dawn and Colt, and then I'm aware of time, so we'll try to move along as crisply as we can. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair Martin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think, I agree with a lot of what's said. I think those that have known me since I've been on the board, one of the things that I've always advocated for when it comes to grant funding, professional development services, pilot projects, and we have geographical diversity. If you've ever been to a meeting we have that, I always talk about that. So I'm really concerned, it's really concerning to me that this opportunity was missed. And what I think is there a bigger issue just beyond this grant funding, but is there an issue within the organization about geographical equity, diversity, when it comes to, because important. And people talk about, oh yeah, we have these geographical locations, these are the districts that receive the money, all this kind of stuff. And so for this to kind of happen, is concerning. Also too, I think that there is a true rural-urban divide. And in fact, a group that I'm part of, American Leadership Forum, is hosting literally 6 urban-rural connection projects that are attended by county commissioners, state representatives, community-based organizations, because this exists, right? And I think this is an example of how urban is, rural is left out. And I live in what is considered still a rural community, but off of I-5, but other places around the state are different. And I'm not sure, again, in general, how many, and I'm repeating what Dr. Martinez said, how many lessons can be learned when you're comparing the Portland metro area to a rural district? Because one of the things that I always remember when we went to go visit Pendleton School District and the Intermountain ESD is how much different it is out there. People are commuting an hour and a half. They just don't have critical mass, all the resources. They don't have all those community-based organizations. They don't have multi-generation, you know what I mean, of people of color, that kind of leadership roles. So it's really different. So if we missed an opportunity to select a rural community and find best practices of what that might look like in that community. So again, I think that, again, I will always advocate for resources geographically allocated, not just this one, but again, I think what it makes me want to request is that maybe we have to see the list of people that are involved. Maybe we do have to see the list of districts that were, awarded grant money, or whether it's pilot projects, because this really, to be honest, quite frankly, should not have happened. And it concerns me a lot. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
And did you want to share any sentiment around this idea of having
We'll have
kind of
time to-
formal mechanism, communities of practice sharing,
And there's just a
summit,
little bit more.
whatever
so.
ODE would lead that? Did you want to comment on that? Anthony?
Oh, sorry. Say that again. I didn't hear that.
Did you want to comment? I put on the table and asked for board sentiment on this idea that we would create a more formal and visible community engaged mechanism for sharing the successes and lessons learned on any of these kinds of grants, but this award in particular.
Yeah, I support that. I think, again, just with a lot of, we can't also put like unrealistic expectations on these dollars. When communities of color have been marginalized, in this case, African American community, and we're giving, this is a starting point. So, there's a lot of work to do, right? That's what the ODE and we are trying to do across the state of Oregon. So, I agree that I guess to answer your question, yes, I agree. I think we need to have some more transparency. But I think along the way, and I'm sure this conversation happens, we have to put some realistic expectations, right? Like, what does success mean? And what does that look like?
Okay, thank you. Don and then Colt.
Yeah, first of all, Markeisha and Dr. Katufu, thank you for your work. And I echo Chair Martinez, I'll just call it a sense of accountability. These are valuable resource dollars, and we need to make sure that they're doing the best. So being able to go back and look for the data and make sure that we're doing the very best we can for our African American students. I want to allude a little bit to what Dr. Russell said. When I look at some of the providers and the methodologies that they use to try to help our African American students, there's some different the way that they try to attack. And I'm just interested in the metrics that we are going to use to determine whether the programs are successful. And then just another comment is I've worked with many of these organizations, and we've done some great things for African American students, but also I think the best outcomes comes through the process when it's a true collaboration with the district and the provider, and the provider's not seen as a silo, to where it really becomes ingrained and part of what the school does. So but and as Dr. Russell says, I've had some better successes with different organizations than others, and I just want to make these are valuable dollars. We're all striving to get these dollars and stretch them as far as we can, and just making sure that because of the different methodologies that these folks use to enhance the lives of our African American students, talking about the metrics, how are we going to really determine if an organization is being successful and we're doing good things for kids?
Thank you, Don. Colt.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in just on a couple of things. So one, I really also support the idea of some kind of formal way to share this information out that is more effective. And I want to echo within that what Anthony said is and I'm sure Don has this experience working in several parts of the state that are much more cut off from the kind of services that you have in the Portland metro area now, to really think about what do these presentations look like and how can we be inclusive beyond the Portland metro or even just the I-5 corridor, as we do have students across the state. And I think that will be a challenge for us both to encourage educators and families and students to participate from those other places. So I want us to be thoughtful about how we're inclusive and it doesn't just become another event with the same people in the room. So I think that will be the challenge to us. Second to that, and this is a little bit related to Anthony's comments and George's comments about the 5%. One of the things that Eric Richardson pointed out, who's the NAACP president in the Eugene Springfield branch, was that he strongly believes, and I think there could be some merit to this, that we have a strong underrepresentation of African American Black students in our data, in that many of these students self-identify as multiracial in our data. And so when we report the numbers and talk about 2% of the students in Eugene 4J, for example, or more than that in some of these metro area districts, it could be how students are self-identifying. And that can be a challenge as we're looking at distributing these dollars more geographically with this next round of the $650,000 in grants that we'll be able to process hopefully after today. So I just wanted to put that out there. I think that's a real challenge.
George?
And I'm going to stop it there. They have the vote next, and there was only one vote that was no, and that was Anthony Valdez, I think is his name. Velez. So that was. Oh, okay. Sorry. I forgot.
Okay. Sorry.
It's too much. Okay. So what I was saying was, what just plugged in.
Message from outside.
Okay.
Turn off your computer. Turn off your laptop.
Testing. While she's doing that, on another point, that one of the points that Charles Martinez made, we've really begun to work on that. In fact, before Colt came over to us, when he was on, what was it called, Chief of Staff, not Chief of Staff, not acting. Oh, here you guys go now. Chief Education Office.
Yeah, he's the innovation officer.
Innovation officer. When he was in that position, he and I met with one of the researchers upstairs, and what we're talking about doing is trying to do a qualitative research study, going to the school districts and finding out what has worked basically with the organizations that we have, working with us now, the four and others, and trying to see what best practices are. And with these best practices, go out and talk to and bring them around and talk to some of the school districts too, to begin to farm it out a little bit to see how we can expand what has worked around the state. That was just one thing that's been discussed and talked about right now. So we're still talking about the research, how that would be done, who would do it, that sort of thing. So some things are beginning in that.
So we just want to give folks, and the comment I had made before the mic was off was that, so the vote was, there was only one vote against the passage of the OARs, and that was co-chair Anthony Valise. So everyone else had voted in favor of. And I, normally we wouldn't show something this long, but I think it was important to see what the conversation was and what the commentary was specific to this, and to kind of get a sense of where, other than Mr. Russell, right, folks have not been involved and maybe even following conversation around this. And so just based on what they've been hearing, what they've seen, because we've done actually a couple of presentations to the state board about this. Kendra had done one. I've done a couple, and so this isn't the first time that they've heard something related to African American Black Student Success Plan or advisory group, any of that. But again, given kind of where we were over the last few months with concerns that were raised, I think it was just a very interesting dialogue, and I agree with a lot in terms of just how we're having folks share out and having that community of practice, as Kim mentioned, just what that would look like, and Dr. T and I are kind of thinking through that. But I think just the other conversation was really helpful for folks to hear if you didn't have a chance to be in the space and to hear that live. So just quick thoughts. We're going to break for lunch here in a moment, but I want to give people a chance to respond.
If I want to see the entire video, is there a link to this?
So for the whole state board meeting, there is. I don't know that they have it posted yet, Victoria, on our website. I think they kind of do some more. I don't know if they edit more or whatever, but we just got this so that we could kind of fast forward to this portion of the meeting. But if you're interested in the full state board meetings, they do have a space on the ODE website where they keep them.
So it will be posted?
Yes, it will be posted. I can't say when, but it will be posted. Keep checking back. Other thoughts or comments? Yes, show us why.
So just quickly, how many rural area organizations or districts applied both times?
One each time has applied. That was outside of Portland Metro.
And
I don't know, and people, we go what's rural or not. I think there's some question there as well.
But just one each time outside.
One each time that was outside of what we would say is Portland Metro, right?
And were they awarded anything?
No. The first time you remember the discussion was for those of you that were here was that we had an application in that score wise didn't. So, but we were having a lot of conversation again about the geographic representation piece, and in the end we had to err on the side of the process and the scores, and so that's what happened with that. And I went with Jan McComb at the time to have a conversation in front of, I think it was our House Ed Committee.
And I was sitting there.
Yeah, that's right. That's
while
right.
You were getting beat up.
It's all right. Take a lick and keep it together. So anyway, that happened. This time around, we've had two. Again, what you decide is rural, I think, is part of that question. We've had one kind of, or two, let me see, two from what would be the Valley, and then one from Southern Oregon.
So this time you've had three outside of Portland.
Three outside of Portland, out of the 7.
Okay.
And we also need to kind of make sure we keep in mind, we want to make sure that people meet the criteria that's set forth, because it does us no good, or does the department no good, to fund a program that does not meet the criteria that's been requested, just to be able to say, we funded a rural. I mean, that, and people have to trust that the process was done with integrity, that the people who reviewed those applications did due diligence in making sure that they dotted the I's and crossed the T's as they evaluated those proposals.
Marquise, you said the 3 out of 7, that was 7 new applications?
This is the new applications.
Not any of the refunded groups?
No.
Okay.
No, this is just what the process we're in now.
Okay, so that's 4 new applications from Portland area
Yes.
and 3 outside.
And one Washington County, so, but they fell into the way that was mapped, that will be considered Portland Metro.
How does the ODE select the people who are
Reviewers?
viewing the applications?
So we
Viewers,
have,
where's the process?
there, a lot of folks from, let's see, there's a variety. So we have folks, YDD does a lot of grant awarding, Youth Development Division. So we've had recommendations that have come from them because they're very versed in this. So they have a pretty wide pool of folks. We've tapped in this time around to some folks that are equity, diversity, inclusion officers, managers in places even outside of education, because we want kind of that perspective in that lens. So we've had some folks there, some school district folks that are not connected to this work, but have a lens for equity, university partners. So it just kind of a wide variety. We and a couple of people internally as well that aren't on our team, but are versed in doing this work in some sort of way.
Can you provide me some of the outside, organizations that you are using?
We will once we've kind of gone through the process. I'd rather not right now, just because we haven't awarded and we're still in that process. But I will. That will be public.
How many people are on those on the selection committee?
So each grant has been read 4 times. So there's 7 grants total. Each of them has had 4 reviewers, 4 different reviewers.
I'm talking about the number of people who are,
People that are reviewing.
Yes.
I think Cynthia, there are 12. Whatever the math is, she can pull that up. I might be saying it wrong. But I think we put out the invite to people to review. Oh, there were probably 30 or 40 that we put it out to, but folks that got back, that have the time, these sorts of things. Okay, 10, thank you.
So the names will be withheld until?
Names will be withheld. Names are never shared of reviewers, but you'll know organizations.
No, the name of the organizations who will be
Yes.
recipients.
Yeah,
Yes.
They are kept.
Yes.
They're withheld
Yes.
until it's announced.
Until it's announced.
Yeah.
I thought I liked the opportunity to look at the proceedings. I think past the selection, the summit is a critical, whatever we're going to put together. And I think the question is a philosophical one. Can the learnings from an area translate to other spaces? And what voices do you need in the translation of those, of the findings, so that it's scalable? And I think, either it's not scalable and you need somebody in the rural to gather the information to demonstrate, or there are things that we can learn, there's learnings from this group that could translate with voice from rural spaces. So I think the big, and maybe we're going to talk about this afternoon, but I think whatever the findings are, how do you get voice to talk through those findings so that they're applicable across the board? I don't know if that, if that's the next conversation.
It could be if it's recommended by one of our advisory committee members. Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Shella Swadden here.
So, yeah, and I was thinking on that same note, what I did really, appreciate from the conversation that was had was the lack of organizations, in the rural areas, or whoever, I can't remember who spoke, said in the rural areas. So there's a lack of organizations to apply for this funding, or to, if they do try to apply, to, have the resources to adequately, present, develop a program and adequately present, a winnable grant proposal. So, and maybe this will go again in our afternoon kind of working session, as we kind of go back and look at, because we talked last time about us moving forward, looking at some of the longer term goals that we had for our success plan. You know, I know in our group, I do not recall, us really speaking, you know, specifically to those environments where the minority population is very sparse, you know, and any specifics on how to support those students. And so I think it would definitely be, I would, you know, ask for us to, you know, start to look at that and to add that piece, you know, to our success plan. Are there some, you know, already effective, you know, evidence-based approaches out there for working with, you know, students in those particular situations that we can look at and, you know, incorporate into our plan. And, you know, I've always looked at our plan as not having too terribly much to do with this grant, but to do with actual success, an integrative success, an integrative plan for our students. And so, you know, on that note, it does, you know, especially in light of few groups to apply, is a grant process, you know, even remotely effective for those students in that area, and if we should be recommending, you know, something else and something very specific.
Well, as part, and I'll just add, as part of the discussion that we had in 15 before we rolled it out, the agency even within had a conversation about what this could look like in rural communities. So really encouraged, you know, the consortium model.
Right.
You know, when I was in Eastern Oregon, I was Umatilla, Pendleton, LeGrand come together with Intermountain ESD to write a grant. You know, so while you all don't have the percent that we were looking for, collectively you do. So we went there.
Yes.
You know, we went and, you know, and after I left, I said, I'm a resource. Let me be a thought partner to what this could look like for your community out there. But I think it boiled down to resources and the lack of diversity in some of our rural communities, and people really thinking, well, you know, what does this work look like once you're gone? You know, this is, you know, and then the decision was made not to do it. So, but I mean, I tapped into all the ESDs in our communities to serve as fiscal agents if there were no CBOs or districts that were willing. So, as an agency, we went there knowing the importance of making sure there was a diverse representation. So,
can I
those
just
things were considered.
Is Mark? Can I just is Mark Jackson? Are you still on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Could you talk about how you attempted to collaborate outside of the Portland area and how that ended up?
Yeah, and I would just affirm what Kendra said, because some of her outreach actually resulted in folks reaching out to me to have a conversation, you know, and part of that led to me being in a series of conversations with folks out in the state of Kaiser, with their person for the actual community outreach night. I followed up meetings with folks. George Russell, myself, tried to engage Eugene School District, no response there at all. So we did legwork, had meetings and conversations, and there was no real engagement.
Right. Yep.
You know, but so we did the proactive effort to kind of be collaborative beyond the Portland metro area. And there was initial interest about as far as the superintendent in taking Kaiser, but then they said we want to support their community programs, and they backed out. You know, so it wasn't because of lack of outreach, engagement on our part.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Subsequently, you know, they weren't funded, and we were funded, and they could have been a part of initial funding cycle had they just been more collaborative and proactive.
Thank you, Mark. Karen?
So I had a couple of thoughts listening. I felt a little bit like it was hard for me not to feel a little defensive about this, in that there was a lot of conversation here, and I don't understand particularly how we have statewide advisory groups, and we have many of them, and a lot of us are on them, and the communication back to the state board just seems so willy-nilly to me. You know, we go and we present, right? Markeisha, and we go and yeah, you're kind of scratching your head how people can think that there was like not thoughtful conversation that really did happen. So I'm concerned that you want to have a summit for this grant.
Exactly.
I want to see the summit for all the grants.
Thank you.
I'm tired
That's
of
right.
the African American work being singled out as divisive.
Yes.
Or why is this one divisive?
Yes.
But everything else is cool.
Thank you,
So to me, if the state board wants a summit, and I agree with you, Reggie, it's a good idea. Have them for all of them. So where's your process as a state board for, in our district, if you go to a
Absolutely.
national conference, you present. That is our process. Everybody does. If I'm gonna spend the money on you to go to Las Vegas, you're gonna come back and tell me what you learned. So I don't understand, if you want accountability, we put in accountability measures.
Yes,
Why don't
we
you
do.
ask us what they are? You don't determine our accountability measures, we do. We're the appointed advisory group, and we're really smart people sitting here. We can do this in a good way, especially with our excellent representation. And then the last thing that I had was the multiracial identification issue is not just in rural areas. This is absolutely an issue in the
Everywhere.
Portland metro area. It is commensurate, in my view. That is not something you point out extra special because you're rural. This is an issue of identification in areas as well as those areas. So I think you just have to be careful. And the last thing is, maybe we would think as our process goes on that you have your criteria, but you take a percentage as a set aside
Yes.
for figuring out new things in suburban rural areas. There's nothing to stop us from doing that,
Well, nothing to stop us from making that recommendation.
making that recommendation.
Absolutely. Ben and then Shalaswa.
Just a couple of thoughts. One on data, since Karen mentioned it and it came up in the meeting. Within higher education, the data reporting protocols are somewhat different. Primarily, the primary difference is that students are not required to report race, ethnicity. And as a result, we have a fairly large category of non-reporters. So it makes some of these estimates even more difficult within the higher education space, where we're attempting similarly to understand the outcomes in a disaggregated fashion. But that wasn't my main point. I really did want to underscore what Shalaswa said about the work of the plan, right, and then the grants. And it's just, they're just very different, right? It's been discussed at this group before, but the grants are not funding the plan, as far as I can tell, right? They're aligned, I would hope at least they're aligned with the plan, but they cannot be understood as constituting the plan. And I also, I think it's important, like grants as a mechanism for doing the work of the plan are not only insufficient, but they're not the right mechanism. In part, I think because of some of the challenges, and it's not just with this grant program, but that rural Oregon, smaller districts, smaller schools face when it comes to grant processes, right? It's just more difficult to get the resources together to apply for a grant. Setting aside all the specific issues that were raised about this one, it just is it's not an efficient mechanism to leverage systemic change. Grants are great mechanisms to develop and support projects that can hopefully then be learned from and taken to scale. But I think we've talked about it at this table before, but just to underscore that point, this group, I hope, goes beyond, as it has, simply the grant program and looks at that plan and says, what do we need to do systemically to make that a reality? It's a bigger project.
And we're going to talk some about that this afternoon around the plan piece. So,
Shalaswa.
So, and I just kind of want to go back a little bit to kind of what Karen was saying, and thank you, Kendra, for sharing that information. And I mentioned it to Renee earlier. Perhaps one of the things I would suggest, that we do for a group, and I'd even tentatively, volunteer for first call on this, is that we, as an advisory group, go ourselves and testify, go ourselves and present the plan to the state board, to the legislature, to the special legislative committee that's, creating this comprehensive plan. So we've created a plan. It's somewhere in the ether. People can, randomly access it. Legislators can randomly access it. And we know that, Markeisha and OD generally have presented this information, right? But we know that it always makes some sort of a difference when community members come up here and say, hey, and so I would like to suggest that, again, like I definitely, felt Karen when she was like, hey, we talked about these things. This is not, happened in a vacuum. We talked to OD about these. OD came back with a response and told us, what they were going to do. And we had these community meetings, and I actually myself spoke with, I think NAACP people and
Right.
Oregon Northwest Black Pioneer people before the first grant even came out. But anyway, my point is, I think I would like for us, to, go and, present our plan ourselves and say, hey, this is, what we as an advisory group of representatives across Oregon have come up with, and we really want you to pay attention to it.
We did that with the Ed Equity Plan. We have gone over 20 places per year, speaking about that plan and that report. And now people are beginning to use that report as data in the work that they're doing because of what she just outlined, is getting out there and saying, this is the plan, hear the plan, support the plan. We're still working out some bugs, but I love the idea of just speaking this plan wherever we can.
And just so you'll remember, when Kendra and several of us were going to these different districts, I went to some of them, which, for whatever it was worth, being co-chair, to me, it underscored the importance and the possibilities for this work. And so we were out there in places saying to people, and I think Valise made a comment that these were opportunities missed. For me, the question is, why were they missed? Was it because people, because everybody around this table has probably been involved in grant processes. And one of the first things you do is a feasibility study. Is it feasible for us to go after this? Do we have the capacity to do this work? If they gave us 50 cents, could we do the work? If they gave us $50,000, could we do the work? So I think that's another issue. If opportunities were missed, maybe there needs to be some discussion with the people who missed out. And, there are times when people are trying to give, grant money, they try to help people develop their capacity. So do they need to have somebody who can sit with them and say, based on where you're at, what you currently have. I always like to work from, what do you currently have in place? Where do you want to be? And then that middle part, what do you have to do to get from point A to point C? And believe it or not, there's some people can't figure that out. They can't even see the bigger picture because they're dealing with the here and the now, and the dollars that I have to work with now. So I think as we talk about processes, we need to look, because even we looked at the distribution of Black students in the state, and it was surprising to us. We were like, what? And then with remember, I think it was Medford, we were surprised at the number of Black students that are in the Medford area. So it was an issue, and like Karen said, and somebody else said, George said, we had some deep discussions about this.
I think this message is, I think as advisory committee, as advisory group, I think it's important for us sometimes, to visit those programs that find out what's happening on the ground, And I would suggest that it would be great if we could have put together some kind of, a committee that consists of members of this advisory group, where we can even call whatever that, I would say that maybe we call grant performance committee, that will will, go into the field and see, the good work, the recipient of the grant are doing. Because a lot of times, we just come here to the meeting, and in the past we used to have, we would have meeting every week, but it seems like now it will be every other, month, right? So that's my suggestion, to put together, an advisory committee or subcommittee that, oversees the performance.
So
of the
you've taken
grants.
some of my thunder, because that was one of the things that Kendra and I had a conversation, and I wanted to know, I said, would it be inappropriate for us to, go and kind of take a look at some of the programs that we have helped to, support?
Share information about the grant with, with families, with students, and.
But I was thinking, I wanted you to go with me. I mean, I think it'd be a good opportunity for you and for me. I mean, I know these programs, but to see them in their element and see how they're being implemented.
A lot of
would be
us are busy, but.
And to
Go down
support
to
them.
see what's happening and also show support of the work, because it is something that's specific to our children.
And there are, those of us who are on daily basis, in the field and working with the families. I mean, a lot of us, I know that we are so busy, but those of us who are willing to be part of this.
I have a question, Mike, in this opportunity.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, I wasn't able to hear the audio from the actual school board presentation, but I'm curious to know, was there any reporting out on how the initial round of funding has leveraged additional support? I recall in the board making it clear to us grantees, where they document how we were able to leverage other resources to scale up the work. And I just say it because I know with the passing of the Measure 98, with Dr. Coakley and Reed, we've been able to expand into other schools within his district to support our kids from other resources. I think it's important that although we are trying to address this issue of geographic equity, it's equally important to show how this initial seed money has leveraged additional dollars to expand and serve additional kids in this particular subgroup. Just point to be made.
So that didn't come up in this particular board discussion. We have talked about in other previous presentations to them around partnership, right? And what that looked like, not specific to what you're saying, Mark, but I do think at some point when you all wrap your head around what this might look like as we're trying to bring grantees together. For now, I'll just use the word summit because I can't think of anything, but that would be, an appropriate opportunity to share something like that. Like I said, this one was focused on the OAR piece primarily, and trying to get those passed, and just a little bit of some background around what had led up to that point. So that was the focus of this particular discussion.
Okay, because I think it's lunchtime, because we need to get our strength back so that we can move forward with this work. I think it was a good discussion. I'm glad that we saw the state board piece, kind of see what's in their heads and what's not in their heads in terms of this work. And Karen, I want to thank you for saying that if there's going to be some protocols put in place or some looking at things, that it should be across the board. Because one of the things that I had a conversation with someone who's been in this education field and battle for years. And one of the concerns they raised is there have been other things that have been raised related to African American students. The department has never done an investigation. So, never, ever. And so, why now? When we've got something that, once again, that was community-driven, and we have some things on the ground where we know, just based on either not only just anecdotal but evaluative data, that there is an impact. And I think the leveraging piece is critically important, and that we need to call that out so that, districts are not going to be trying to leverage resources to something that's not having an impact. Karen Gray couldn't explain that to her board. So, anyway, y'all enjoy your lunch, and then we'll come. This is a working lunch, so y'all got to work over lunch. Okay, I'm gaveling us out. Okay. We are now in session again, Renee and Shellisma. We're back in.
Like a teacher, it's like a
You know how
teacher,
how teachers do.
Like the teacher came out real quick. I was like, well, calling names, Miss Joy.
Yes. So we are going to reconvene for our afternoon session, our continuation of our working session. I could tell that you all were talking about the things that you needed to talk about.
Disrupted learning.
Oh.
And jazz.
And jazz. And all that jazz.
You messed us up, girl.
I don't know how many of you knew Pastor Hardy at Highland Church. He just passed. So I just wanted to let people know. Mark sent a text. The Love Community leader. He had fought a very good fight with his illness, and I'm quite sure there's going to be quite a celebration up at Highland. Yeah. So if you know anybody who, knew him, attended that church, you might want to just reach out to him and let him know how valuable he was to our community. Yeah. So we had on the agenda an update on OCF, and we thought that Kali was going to do that, but she is not available. So we're going to table that because she has gone to the meetings, and I think she could provide the update in terms of where we're at with that. We do have a guest here from OCF, but would not be appropriate for her to do the update. We need to have it come from one of the advisory committee members. But you want to just introduce yourself?
Come up to the microphone. Just so it's, excuse me.
Don't kill yourself in the process.
I know some of you, not all of you. I'm happy to be here. I'm Mary Louise McClintock. I'm the Director of Education Programs at the Oregon Community Foundation, and we've been engaging with Kali and a few other members of this group on some conversations that she will update you on, she or others in the future.
Thank you so much for coming and listening in and kind of getting a feel.
It's been very interesting for me, and I've been glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. So we've done our school and community updates. So we're running a little ahead of the schedule, except
One update, she wasn't here for that discussion.
Can I go to Laurie first because?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, of course. Laurie?
I sent to Cynthia for all of you to receive this month's Atlantic Monthly.
Right.
Had a wonderful article, maybe some of you have already seen it,
Mhm,
but the real issue is around teacher diversity. And that, you'll be shocked to hear, has to do with hiring bias.
Never heard of that.
But anyway, so it's a good article, and I just thought I'd share it so that everybody could see it.
Thank you. We shared that in our district too. That was really good, Lori.
Okay, Karen, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
just very
Update.
briefly, and this is a Markeisha deal too. February 22nd, some of the members of our Ed Equity Committee are going to be hosting an equity plan alignment meeting where people from the department and around town who are working with equity plans or plans that are around diversity, linguistically, ethnically, racially. We all write plans, and we don't have any alignment around those plans. So we're going to start a conversation and try to do some powerful work about leveraging and making some synergies around what those commonalities are in those equity plans so that we're not siloed. That's a really important thing to me anyway, I think to us, is to make sure that we're connecting. It's much more powerful. So it would be a fun thing to report back on at some point, I feel like. I don't know of any other time this has ever happened in the state. I don't remember ever doing this, where you have a tribal curriculum plan, you have the Alaska Native American plan, you have the ELL plan, you have the African American Student Success plan. You have all these plans that also involve equity, but none of them are aligned. And they're all saying some similar things. So we're gonna make an attempt to do that, and it'll be out at the Wainema Center at Chemeketa Community College. I'm really excited about it. After this meeting, we're gonna do some planning.
So where again? This is a public meeting?
No. I don't know what this is. What is it?
It's not public at this point. I think we're just kind of bringing folks together that have had some input around one of these plans and starting the conversation. At some point, I'm sure we'll decide what that looks like, but there's people, within our team that have some responsibility for some of the work, and so I think it's having some sharing around that.
I think it's like the jumping off point for something much bigger.
Yep.
So hopefully we could keep you in the loop on that so that you could hear more about that, because I always wondered if we ever really hooked up, what we could really do. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so,
It's all you, Ms. Joyce.
this is the advisory group discussion. And a couple of things we need to kind of talk about is prioritizing our work. And what that really means is identify our work. And I think, the response that Colt made regarding the OERs and the concerns, there are some things in there that we might want to look at and say that, yeah, this is something that we need to also be engaged in. Committee membership. We have lost members due to attrition. Either they're moved or do we. And at this point, one thing that I would be a little bit cautious about is, since Colt and the department are looking at advisory committee makeup, is that?
Part of it.
That's part of it? Okay, so I think that I'm not one to kind of wait until somebody tells me what they want us to do. I think as an advisory committee, we can make a recommendation. Yep. And then we did start some preliminary discussion about the dissemination of the African American Black Student Success Plan. So we will do that. It doesn't appear that we have any public testimony. Good. So the wrap-up will be short and sweet.
Yep.
Okay, so let's start the discussion around our work. Our work. And just based on the conversation we had this morning, are there any things that jump out at you that we need to look at as part of the work that we need to do?
Quick question. Have we, I know we decided as a group, last meeting that we wanted to meet every other month. Is that something that ODE has approved? Are we going to be meeting every other month, or are we going to go just do the quarterly thing?
We're good every other month.
We're doing every other month.
Okay.
You took your suggestion.
Yes.
You took our recommendation.
And Cynthia will now make sure that you've got the calendar invites. We just needed to, with holidays and everything kind of happening, so you'll have them. So we'll meet again in April. And I guess, go ahead. The other thing I will note is we're going to have a support change because it does create a little bit of a capacity issue with our two support folks, and we're going to kind of balance that out. So Victoria, wave your hand, Victoria. She's going to start, she's actually used to support when we first started.
Yeah. Yes.
So she is going to be coming back on as the support person for our meetings.
So where's Cynthia going?
she's gonna work with just CAG and her other groups. They all have, we got lots of groups, Ms. Joyce.
Cynthia,
I hate to say it.
you
but
didn't ask her
this is not the
permission to
only
be
one.
let go.
This is not the only group we have. We got lots of groups, so.
But then she said you didn't ask for her permission.
You know I depend on you for support.
Yeah.
This is true. Okay. So our next meeting will be the first Friday. Oh, that's another thing that we need to talk about. Well, is that still an issue?
I mean, I think it won't be an issue now that we've
Okay,
kind
now
of
that you-
internally
okay.
balanced it out. Because what was happening is that we have a couple of meetings. There's actually one, I think, April, that literally all our advisory meeting groups are at the same time. And that's an issue for Victoria and Cynthia on the planning side of things. But since we're going to balance it out, we don't need to, because we were going to revisit maybe thinking about switching some of the Fridays, but we can leave it alone.
Y'all
now.
will be proud to know that I
Worked it out.
resisted that.
And I shared it.
Vehemently. I said no.
I didn't share it that way. I said, we just prefer that we keep them on the first Fridays. So,
Well,
we
because
worked it out.
we're wired that way, and we were asked what worked best for us.
You were.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Anyway,
Well, it seemed like we, in prioritizing the work, are you open to
Yes,
conversation? It seemed like we had a really good suggestion from Abdi to do maybe some visitations. So perhaps that could actually be calculated as a piece of our work.
we need a scribe.
we can, do you want me to
Let me get
put it
somebody.
on the, Cynthia's taking notes, but do you want something up on the screen?
Sure.
As people are doing, I can do that too.
Okay, let's do that.
Don't kill me with spellings off as I'm trying to.
No
Can
red
we-
pen.
Can we make it this as a, like as a committee where we can just report back to the advisory committee?
Well, let's first identify the work that we think we want to do,
And then the process.
and then we can look at the process. Okay.
And another thing that we talked about was making sure that we're communicating about the work of this group and about the work of this plan. Not only, my hope would be maybe statewide. So like when there's conferences that come around and people are at those, and when there are community events that are broadly advertised, those are really good times for us
That's
to
right.
show up and get a spot on the agenda.
Absolutely.
And so maybe to work on that like strategically and really make sure that we do that, but also with the state board so that they know kind of the accuracy of the work that's going on here and what the conversations have been, rather than kind of extrapolating what the work has been. So it would be, I feel like, I guess I'd call that a communication plan. It reminds me that the group could use a communication strategy, which is around our work to legislators.
Right.
I want to go to the legislators and say, give us more money. We need more money, and here's why we need more money. And be able to get community input again, because we did, and it's good. And then also with the state board. So to me, that's a communication plan. I don't want us hidden under a bushel.
And that's a good idea, especially if we have, I guess, the funding and the manpower to, have a series of meetings like we did before, a series of community meetings, where we're updating the community on, sharing the plan that was created, because we didn't have one before.
Right.
Updating the community on the grants that were awarded and I guess in that update information that's available publicly, so kind of directing them to that, as well as, again, getting their feedback in terms of how the plan might need to be assessed, and I like that.
Get some feedback.
Yeah.
It'd be really cool.
Yeah.
So definitely that would be the work of this committee that I'm talking about, where they will be going out there talking to the family, disseminating the information, even talk to them about the events that about the grants that were awarded to the recipients, to those community-based organizations, see how those impacted on them. And
I think we're talking about two different types of meetings, because I see what you're talking about is really directly interacting with people whose lives will be impacted by this grant because they either have children or grandchildren or just as a community. The other type of interaction I'm thinking about, I know that ODE does meetings. We need to be on those agendas. If they're having a conference, we need to be able to say, we would like for members of our advisory committee to do a presentation. I mean, I believe in carrying your own water. And so we've worked hard on pulling this together. Then we should make sure that we can communicate to others. Like, just for example, the challenges that we had around looking at reaching out and why it was important to have collaboration. That was intentional. That didn't just happen. So, I mean, I think that's what we're talking about, two different types of meetings. We're talking about going to, like, Kendra just had this OACE conference. You know, we could have very well said, Kendra, we want to make a presentation at your conference. So
we kind of need somebody to keep up with a list of conferences and shoot out an email and say, can somebody go to this? Or if we, most conferences are planned at least a year in advance, right? So we can come up with a calendar. Someone can generate, a calendar of conferences. And then, we can sign up for when we want to go and which ones we want to present at.
And we can even create, I keep saying this, but like the Ed Equity team, we create a packet of PowerPoint that is a baseline PowerPoint about our work. And what Hilda and I do is we tailor that
to different groups.
Very informative PowerPoint about our plan to the exact group that we're going to. And we always craft essential questions.
Oh, exactly.
And it is easy once you have that. However, she does the lion's share of the work on the actual writing. So we're lucky that we have somebody on our team right, Markeisha? I mean, she does that. That's what she does. She's the staff. So it does require a bit of staff to be able to help us to sign up for those conferences. And also, like, some of us are already at those conferences. Why can't we dovetail into just presenting instead of just sitting?
Like in Service Day.
Yes.
October and Service Day.
Right. Right.
And when there are multiple things going on,
We split up the work.
School counselors.
we need to dispatch people to, because like in Service Day, there are any number of things going on. We might need about 6 or 7 people. And I agree with Karen, we definitely need to have a PowerPoint and a presentation. Real,
Base.
That's it.
And a base PowerPoint.
That's it.
So
Yeah.
that all of us are sharing
the same
equally.
information.
Right.
Yeah,
Same message.
Same message.
absolutely.
Well, I just so happen to have an email that says there's some conferences this summer. OSBA, OTLA, and OSS.
And we have one too.
Yeah,
Our summer
Great
leadership
place to do
academy.
it.
right. So that's something that definitely I think would be wonderful for us to do. And start getting people to thinking about who can do what.
We need to fill this position.
Don't put that
It
on.
it needs a lot. You gotta have backup on this.
I'm gonna do it.
Gotta have support.
Well, but we do have some advisory committee members who are excellent at doing that.
Don't look at her right now.
And I'll work with the excellent person.
Kendra's very good at
Because-
that. Kendra, oh my God.
There-
She's back.
There are some
What
people.
happened? Let's go up to HR.
Yeah.
She went back to.
Superintendent.
Oh, you mean back on our board?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's a baseline PowerPoint. It's a baseline grid of the different places we can share. And there's lots of different places we can share, not just conferences. And the idea of actually signing up is like a sign up. Get your name on here. So that, and then a different thing we heard was about a subcommittee doing a performance review of the different grantees, going and visiting and looking at best practice and coming back and saying, what did you see? What
I'd be careful about that.
Oh, okay.
Because we do have an evaluator who has a contract to do that work.
Okay.
I want to go and visit the different places because I just want to see what they're doing.
Oh, just go see what they're doing. I
Yeah,
see.
yeah, not to do any kind of
Okay, got it. I forgot.
evaluation.
Yeah, we have an
Right,
evaluator
we have
for
an
that.
evaluator.
Got it, good, good.
And
I'll be asking some evaluator questions.
you do
Different Dr. T.
Yes. Yes,
So the,
yes.
sorry to interrupt you. So what is that, the RMC, that research, are they the ones who are doing the performance?
they're doing the
evaluation?
evaluation, yes.
So are they going in the,
That's the only way they can do it. They have to meet with the grantees
meet.
and yeah.
And we're a little behind right now just because of other things that were happening that we've already talked about. So it set us back a little bit, but I can speak from the first round. They met monthly. Grant evaluator, project directors.
They attended, I had project director meetings monthly, and the researcher was there every one of them. Just because she wanted that level of discussion, and then to help create the evaluation models for each one, because, with culturally
So that's-
specific,
yeah.
it changed. I mean, what they did at ERCO, for example, was so totally different than all the other ones, because they had to present in like 6 languages.
Right.
And they did all of their work in the language of the parents that, the native language of families, just super, super culturally responsive, and their results were incredible. As far as engagement and, being able to set that opportunity for
so
feedback.
how often would they come back here to report us, those guys, the whatever researcher,
As often as we
Yeah,
like.
That's up to
They
us.
did it
Twice.
2 or 3 times.
Yeah, I feel like it was 2 for
She
certain.
came to meet us,
Right.
and then she came to give us like here's
An
where
update.
we're thinking
Yeah.
the evaluation model, what we
Maybe
think
it
it'll
was
look
3.
like, and then here's where, what the plan
I
is.
think it was 3, yeah.
Yeah.
In addition to the projects coming and giving updates.
Elsewhere.
Oh, and then I would also throw in there in terms of looking at planning ahead, to look at having 2, I guess, work sessions in the future that would focus, where we go back to our
Your
specific
plans.
small groups, right, and look at updating the plan, and so I'd say at least 2. Because one, I'm thinking updated based upon, stuff we've already talked about, like we talked about, kind of looking at it with a specific eye towards smaller communities and smaller schools and districts, and how we might adjust the plan with that in mind. And then coming back together and updating the plan once we've had another round of community information sessions. And gotten some additional feedback, from our local communities.
Got it.
Yeah, I would think.
I think,
No, Ms. Frank was
was
first.
first, okay.
Frank.
Sorry, Ben, hold on.
Oh,
You're next.
okay. I would think that, at least preliminarily, that presentations would need to include at least some information that says, these are the preliminary outcomes. This is what we're seeing. It's not changing anything from the research, and we're not communicating the research, because the researchers can do that. But I would think if we could extract some things, some major bullets that say, in this first round, this is what we found, ABC. these are some preliminary outcomes that we've seen. There have been positive areas in this and this and this that gets communicated, because I think that you know, we're not going to want to wait until everything's done to start talking about the results of what is happening. I think.
Yeah.
So I'll just.
Yeah. Definitely. Ben?
I'm wondering about the potential role of this advisory committee in advising on budgets for the upcoming biennium. It's hard to believe, but our agency and ODE as well are already beginning the process of beginning to think about our recommendations to the governor and the legislature on funding for education. And I think there's potentially a role for this advisory committee in advising the agencies, advising, stakeholders, community at large on the types of investments that will be required to move forward with the plan, including the grant program, but not limited to the grant program, in order to make the kind of difference for Black African American kids that we envision. So I don't know where sort of in the process or on the agenda that sits. I know that as a formal matter, agencies, ODE, the HEC, et cetera, submit their sort of budget requests, if you will, that sort of kicks off the budget process on August 1st. But that means that actually much of the work is done well in advance of that. The systems require those requests to be sort of developed and inputted well before August 1st. So in some sense, although 2019 feels like a long way off and that biennium is still, we're not even halfway done with this one, but in some sense that time is now, at least for our organization. I can't speak for ODE, but for the HEC, that time is now to be thinking about the
I think March is kind of our target date, but we've been, just in terms of our equity team has been having some conversation around, what we're thinking about.
So as we think about these things, I also want people to think about who in the department can support us in doing this and what other kind of support we may need. So this whole budget piece, I would like somebody to talk to us about how that works. How should it look? And Ben, I thought about you, even though you're with the HEC, you could provide us with some valuable feedback on how we do
I was
that.
with Ben here then. I had someone. Let's be specific.
But I can't represent ODE in that process.
But you're about the process, though, right?
I can talk about the process that government agencies use generally, and I can talk about what we're doing at the HEC specifically.
That's all we
budget
probably want.
We need. Saving me from looking for someone.
No, you still need to look for somebody.
Oh, Miss Joyce. Miss Joyce.
I'm gonna keep you busy, Markeisha. You're not busy enough.
Have anything to do.
You're not busy enough. Nah. So that's good. Good feedback. The whole thing about the budget piece.
And making sure we speak with legislators.
Yeah.
We have to make sure, these are the ears we need to make sure, wherever we're living, I feel like Park Rose meets rigorously with our legislators. And we decided this year, we're not going to meet with the legislators who are part of the choir. We're going to meet with the ones who aren't, because they don't believe us when we say we need money. So I feel like, if we want to keep this going, and like with Senate Bill 182, there were dollars in there from the Ed Equity team in Section 9 about the Teacher Scholars Program. So that was a real little teeny piece of money, but it's going to support 64 people to be able to finish their teaching license. And we want to build the workforce, right? And diversify it, but we need to build the workforce. So we're just going to be pounding our legislators about this. It's the same for this committee, I would think, is that, we got some money. We want to show preliminary outcomes. We want to talk about why this is important. But I feel like so many people don't understand what we're doing. They don't even see it as an issue. They don't see it as an issue. Even my local legislators having a really hard time understanding how a 50-50 budget isn't good news for a lot of districts. Because you need that 50 to just get through. You don't have any money for the roll-up. You're getting killed, most of us. They don't understand that. They think you have enough. And what's the problem with African American students anyway? I don't get that. So I just hope maybe we'd make sure that we avail ourselves as folks whenever we're in front of people to say, oh, by the way, do you know what the work of HB 2016 is and what we're doing? Oh, you never heard of that? Okay, let me tell you. Like at Equity Team, we created an elevator speech on a credit card. So we know we go, oh, whip that out, I'm in the elevator. Let me tell you what our goals are, even though you don't want to hear it. You know, it's really, really helpful.
Do you want to add that to this?
Yes,
Okay.
I would, but it depends on if anybody else wants to.
We do. Okay.
You know, maybe not in the short session as much, but boy, in the long session, absolutely. We need more, not less. Remember what we identified when we first did our plan? Was it 10 million a year? Maybe 20 or 60? I can't remember.
Well, and Brian came back with numbers, if you remember, in
I
the plan
remember.
about what it would be. I think it's
Yeah,
More than that.
it's like
Yeah.
70. It's,
yeah, yeah.
it's a lot of money.
So this, you know,
So-
we need it.
So are those numbers on the website, you know, where we have all the documents from our meetings listed?
So there, it's, the plan is posted. So those are in that, those numbers are in the plan. It's in the appendices, I think, and
Okay.
toward the back. So that's there.
The cost.
Yes, the
Right.
cost.
Cost base, okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And, that budget, request part, that goes to point 8 in Colt's letter as well,
Right.
budget recommendation.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking
That's-
at.
I think
We
that was what
have
Ben was speaking to.
number 8, which was the budget proposal. And then number 7 we talked about, which is updates to the plan. I'm a little curious about number 4, Darryl Marquisha. He will collect input from the State Board of Education leadership and the governor's office to review the membership composition of the advisory group to ensure that the membership reflects the diversity of stakeholders who serve our state's African American Black Student Success Advisory Group.
Basically, that's the demographics in terms of what we've been discussing and talking about, in terms of not just having folks in Portland area, but also folks from the east. And I think sometimes that was tried once before, and I was told there were some people, but they.
Yeah, exactly.
So what it means is that we gotta recruit some people, in those areas. So that may be in terms of some of the trips that we're gonna take.
Also, well, you're right, Dr. T. And I think there was also a question around who was on the group that might also be grantees.
You see, that's what I'm asking
So
about.
that I think was
That's
the
what I'm
under, and I mean, I'm
asking
not
about.
trying to be,
That's
I'm
the
just
underlying-
full transparency.
Exactly.
I also think that was something that was called out.
Right.
I'm not making that up, that we had that
So
information
recommendation
here,
could be
so,
coming from you all about that. You have a recommendation?
so that was, and that's not what this is saying, that's not what this says, but I think that's what
Yeah.
conversation
That has come up.
that has come up. And so, Ms. Joy? Oh,
No, I knew there was some underlying something there, and I just needed to hear
But
sorry.
Can we just ask that? How, your feelings about that in terms of, folks, once they receive or receiving monies from the program, should they now, from that point on, not be on the committee or on the committee? Let's just throw it out.
I don't know, Darryl, that we, because, you know, when I look at it, and we look at the people who have been on this committee, and this was, people were recruited for this committee long before there was any money. And clearly, there were reasons, sound reasons, why these people were recruited for this. And as long as they have no input in the recommendations that we might make related to the funding and all of that, I think these are things that we need to just look at,
Yep, I agree.
you know, so. We haven't had that conversation now. I don't know if we're gonna have time to have it in the next, 15 minutes, 30 minutes? I think it's something we need to think about. And I don't know when is this thing when is COAT gonna collect input?
Well, he's collecting input now from all committees in terms of, also term limits.
Yeah,
The
term limits.
That's another thing that came up, term limits.
Chair and co-chair came up. Which ones have co-chairs and chairs? Term limits, and then the piece around, specific to this group, because I think this group is, the other groups, I'll say for our equity team that we facilitate, don't also have a grant component to them. So that, those I think were the three.
So I'm gonna throw this out to the group because y'all done got real quiet on me.
I think that's what I can say. Y'all quiet about saying that.
This looks like this may be something that we do need to have a discussion. Unfortunately, since we don't meet every month, we can't have that discussion the first of next month. We'd have to wait until April. So maybe it is something that we need to have a conversation about now, so that we can send our recommendations to COAT and party.
I think it gets back at the membership issue, because let's say, like we had people on the advisory group that were, they did not know that they would receive a grant. So, but they were with us. But if they leave us, let's say once you receive a grant, you are no longer able to serve on the committee. Then we have to figure out, do we need to replace that voice on the committee? Because I could see this coming up. Let's say we talked about rural, right? So let's say a rural person received a grant. And if we say, well, now that you received a grant, you're no longer on the committee. Now what do we do at that moment? Because that could have been the only rural-facing space that we have. But I think it's going to get at membership. I can see where the challenge could exist with that, and it's a perceptual challenge, right? So it's how it's perceived.
That's what it is.
But I think we're going to have to talk about how do we replace at that moment, and what's the criteria for replacement, and what's the speed of replacement.
I think also the knowledge that those parties bring to the table.
Yes,
that would be a huge loss.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I think. Yeah, that's how I feel. All I can picture, and it's just me, and maybe because we work so closely together, I'm picturing Tony Hobson saying, a man who has, I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. None of us does. Has this kind of experience in the work that he does, has a voice that is so unique, and positioned so uniquely in the African American community and working with our kids. And to say, we have board members that have to declare a potential conflict of interest.
Right.
And they do so because their kids are involved or their wife is involved. And if you have a smaller district, that could be your secretary or your science teacher. So then you just say, no, you need to declare a conflict of interest when we're talking about money issues. Then and you're out of the conversation. But to say that you lose that voice even in your
We're talking about
conversation.
3 African American males from Portland from the city of Portland, who work with a great number of African American males. That's a void. 3. We have 3.
That's right.
That's.
And remember, that's how we did it with the voting on the percentages, in terms of
the reductions.
They have,
clear
and it
conflict.
was a blanket statement
That's
around
right.
anything that has to do with.
So we just need that recommendation coming from you saying if they just have to declare a conflict of interest, but we still need to have it if that's the way you want to go.
Kendra?
But if this is, so now I'm wondering though, what other advisory committees within ODE have members who receive funding? Your district receives money from
Tons.
ODE. Portland receives money from ODE. Salem receives money from ODE. Are they not eligible anymore?
Oh, I don't think so.
You know what I mean? If
Yeah,
this,
that's
if
right.
this position is made.
That doesn't even make sense.
Right, then does that?
Yeah, fairly and evenly applied.
No, we're not saying you're going.
Once again, it's the
We just
African-American
got.
You're gonna have to come sit next to the principal.
I'm like, we just got her. She can't go.
No, she gotta come sit next to the principal because her and Bobby Bridges they've been disrupting me.
Disruptors.
So is ODE going to do an
Yeah,
audit
right.
of all of the
All of
committees, initiatives that you have and all the committees that you have, and, you know, I mean, it just,
Right, we have EPPs on the Ed Committee. We also have a scholarship. What happens then?
And they're
We don't
probably,
get to
they're
have
probably,
fun.
some of those prep
And I
programs will
think
probably get money.
Kendra is raising some of what I'm kind of feeling and hearing, is that, is this group, even though you say you're gonna do it with all the committees, it just seems that it's focused on
It's a little
this
microscope.
particular committee, yeah.
No, it's not really focused on just this group, but.
But sometimes in order to get a group that you want, you just say, oh, we including everybody.
Well, that could happen, but it's not happening in this case, because they need to, they need to be able to see about all the different committees. I didn't know there were so many. But he's just really trying to do an investigation just to see just how they're made up, and seeing if there's any recommendation when they come. I believe that the recommendation, like you all are saying now, comes from here about still having folks on there declare a conflict of interest. That would be recommended, that
That's what we
should be
all do.
sufficient.
That actually happened when we were, in
That's right.
True.
discussion.
Yes.
So,
That's right.
Yeah.
So essentially, out front.
Our legacy.
So in a sense, you'd
and
be
it
out
wasn't
front.
right, it's just how we operate.
You see what I'm saying?
We
You'd
have
be
to
out
get to
in
still
front.
vote.
We have them in writing now.
Be out in
They
front
just have to
making the
say there's a
recommendation,
conflict of interest.
rather than
They
responding
still
to
get to vote.
anything else.
We don't even let our people vote.
Okay. So,
It just seems to me
Committee.
that we've been following the rules
The
and
protocols, yeah,
regulations and
we
just
have.
doing it, and still the scrutiny is here. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, kind of thing.
And we followed it because we're professional.
Amen.
And we black, we know, we gotta do it.
it's just like the issue that was raised about, members of this committee were involved in, the decision-making.
Right.
We had that presentation on ethics. We got letters saying that you will not serve on the proposal development committee or the review committee. And we all understood that. I distinctly remember a conversation and people saying, well, there's somebody from here needs, and somebody said, Joyce, you need to be, no, I don't. Because I understand how this stuff works. And unfortunately, it came out exactly the way it would have come out had we done that. So I just think that we just need to be real clear about what we want to say to the, Ben?
Well, just, I agree with all this. I think the piece that gives me pause is actually the fact that there have been members who have been advised to declare a conflict of interest. Because, I mean, I think to your point, Joyce, because of the separation, and I don't have an answer to this question, I think it maybe bears a little more investigation, but because of the separation and the fact this group does not actually make allocations of dollars, it does not choose grant recipients, it may not give rise to conflict of interest, and the declaration of conflict of interest may actually perpetuate the perception that there's something
That's a good point,
untoward
Ben.
going on here. So this gets into areas of sort of ethics and law that I'm certainly not an expert on, and I wouldn't want to discourage somebody from declaring a conflict of interest when they might need to. So, that's the piece where I'm like, well, given the separation, why isn't the point that there aren't people, regardless of whether you're a grant recipient or anything else, you don't have a conflict of interest at this table because this table is not making funding decisions. And conflict of interest arises when there's typically when there's a personal stake in dollars. So I just would maybe look into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Or declare the separation.
Yeah.
Even louder than you normally would.
Right.
Because people should know that, but they don't, and then they're assuming the worst. So maybe making the declaration is not a conflict of interest, but hey, by the way, we don't make these decisions. Why did you even think that in the first place?
Right.
Just being very clear about that. Yeah.
Okay, so that sounds to me like a conversation with your ethics people.
So I'll say, are you recommending that we're not excluding folks that have, is that the recommendation?
Right. I think that's what, we've come all around the barn on that.
Funding decisions, why
Yeah.
would we do that?
Yes, I move that,
Okay.
our recommendation on this particular point be, the committee recommends that we not exclude, members who have received or will apply, for future grants. And we can even, I would also, in this motion, recommend that we add in, an explanatory sentence or two, that we don't want to lose the value of those voices when there is a clear delineation that those people have no input whatsoever in how funds are distributed.
And Cynthia got all that. I just got it.
Cynthia, did you get it all?
She's got it.
I'll second.
Discussion?
I think we just need to include the clarification in the communication plan, because it seems like when we're communicating, we just need to be explicit that is different, so these things don't continue to come up.
Right.
So did Colt seems to understand that, right? Am I wrong in this? Like, he doesn't say that. We're just making sure that that doesn't come up as a problem because it's brought up as a problem.
Well, he understood after I called him and told him that he needed to look at.
I'm sorry.
Well, good, it's the truth.
That's right.
My natural straightened out for a minute because I knew that we had a presentation, which at one point I was a little offended. You got to tell me how to be ethical.
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized that, you're dealing in this kind of arena, and those little things that may seem to be minor points tend to be major. And this was a perfect example of this. And so when, in his response, where he was just talking about how the grantees didn't have, any decision-making power, the advisory committee didn't help write the RFP. And I called him and I said, look, Colt, I said, we had a presentation where it was very explicitly made to us. You will not serve on the proposal development committee or the review committee. And we even got it in writing. And so I said, that would have strengthened what you said if you had it just, and so in a subsequent email, he did point that out. And he assured me that from here on in, whenever he had that, if that was brought up, that he had the information. And Markeisha actually went and pulled up didn't we have a PowerPoint? Yeah.
Well, Cindy came.
So that's why, once again, I kind of like to always say and make comments during our meetings about us making recommendations as an advisory group, so nobody can ever misinterpret what we know to be our role, which is as advisors. And it's up to them to take our advice and our recommendations. Now, if they go all the way south on us and they don't take into account our recommendations and it comes back at them, then that's on them. That's not what we recommended.
The reason I'm
Reggie.
mentioning having a communication plan, because I don't know whether the larger community might be perceiving a similar, might have the same misunderstanding or a misperception. So I think we could be clear as we go to these meetings and all that.
Absolutely.
Just to make sure that everybody understands it, because the worst thing to happen to me is that the folk in the community will be saying something like that.
They are.
I know that.
We got it right here.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong though, but I think in the past, in the process of getting the RFP out there, some of the community members they had input in that process, right?
Made recommendations. We made recommendations, which is what we were supposed to do.
Recommendation is or input, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But not a decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the distinction. That's the distinction. And at the time, we didn't have any grantees.
That's right.
There were no grantees.
Didn't have anything.
Nobody knew who was going to be applying or who was going to win an award. Yeah. Anyone else? So we had a motion on the floor. We had a, what do you call it, an add-on? An appendage? An addendum?
An amendment.
An addendum?
It was friendly.
A friendly amendment.
It was pretty friendly.
And you had seconded it. And so somebody tell me, because I get Roberts all confused sometimes.
We had our discussion.
We had our discussion.
Right.
Call the question.
Right, you're calling the question.
She approved it, right?
You approved the friendly amendment.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, all those in favor of all of that happened on that side of the table, the motion, the friendly amendment, it was seconded. Everybody who approves that, please lift your voices high and say, aye. Aye. All those who are opposed, say no. Motion passed.
So I have another thought I want to throw out to the group for discussion on this same issue.
Under membership, tell us
Under
why.
membership,
Okay.
under membership. So would it be, does it make sense for us to recommend that there be a seat reserved on the committee for every branch of the NAACP to have a representative, and we already have by not designated, but we have, a representative from the Urban League already here. So does it make sense to say that this committee, has specifically, seats for the local branch NAACP representatives?
Does that run?
And the NAACP can pick?
So then do you have to?
Yeah.
Oh, one out of the.
I thought she was saying 4 too. I was gonna say, oh, hell no.
Well, no, I guess I did mean 4.
You did
because
say 4, no.
Because what's going on in Eugene is very different, right, from what's going on in Corvallis. But, or we have one. that's the point of me throwing out for
Or
discussion.
this, it
So
all
it'd be
gets
one
to that
for
process.
the
How
Oregon
is this?
NAACP
Yeah.
and Oregon NAACP coalitions together, pick one person?
Question along that line. Do you run into challenges then with other organizations? Do you have the Black
Urban League.
United Front that needs to be here, the National
Big.
Negro Association, you know what I mean? All these different black specific organization kind of.
We got them. We got organizations.
Yeah. No.
And
I think it might open us up to having to have a representative from each designated black
that's a
group,
good point.
self-appointed or not, organization.
Yeah.
And your committee grows.
And sometimes for the wrong reasons, you have representation.
Maybe it's just like we continue to have as community represented groups, and then getting back to membership to make sure that we have sectors across the different educational spaces and community represented groups. I mean, as opposed to calling a specific group out.
Yeah, I think that what I would like to see us recommend is that we look at the geographic composition and look at those places where we have lost the representation and try to fill them, because we had Medford, we had, what was Joseph from, Ontario? There was someone else that we were going to try to get, but that we look at reaching out to those places where we have the rural communities and try to fill. That's what I'd like to see us do. I don't necessarily see that we need to replicate anybody that we have sitting around the table who is from the Portland metro area. I don't think we need to do that. We had somebody from Hillsborough, and then she was, and we also need to look at not just the geographic, but the role group. Because remember, we had Monique, who was representing parents. And I don't know that we have anybody, with the exception of when Charles was on the committee, BPI is a parent group. So That's what I would recommend, that we look at filling those geographic holes that we have. And then the role groups. And we, at one point, we talked about possibly even having a student. Yeah. So, somebody make that recommendation. I don't like to make the recommendation.
But
Renee?
instead of us trying to try to include all the organizations, when we talk about our communication plan, that we, someone says, I will go to the NAACP meeting for the month of so-and-so, and make sure they know about the organization and ask for feedback. I would prefer that rather than trying to represent each group, because
Right.
and probably, for the most part, we already have people going to a number
Yeah.
of these meetings.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a way to bring
And
in
being a
their,
part of these different
their
organizations.
input, and to make sure they know about what's going on
Right.
with our board.
Exactly.
We go to them instead of them
Right.
coming to us.
Right.
And I've been
Wonderful
able
idea.
to kind of leverage some of what, we have done, and because I serve on a couple of other advisory committees, and I find myself sharing with them, this is what the African American Black Student Success Plan advisory group is doing, or have people even ask me questions about that. So that's something else. You begin to look at the groups that you are connected to, and you become the resource, you become the liaison between that group and our group. So I think I think what we're really talking about is how do we step up ourselves to be able to outreach and engage other people and organizations. That's what we're talking about.
Joyce, do you have any objection to me and perhaps somebody else from the committee drafting a communication plan for this group for the next meeting?
Of course not. I don't.
Because then-
Markeisha said, skip Joyce. I don't.
It's really clear from this conversation how important that is.
Oh, it is.
And,
It
and
is.
everybody's been really clear. It's fairly succinct. But I feel like a lot of it fits underneath that kind of banner of communication. And if we could at least not have a blank piece of paper, but I'll draft some kind of plan around that, then I probably will share it with folks, just so that I'm not working in a bubble. But I would love to do that. That's kind of my thing. And
Okay, I don't usually make recommendations, but I'm gonna make this one. I recommend that we ask Karen Gray and people who are brave enough to work through this with Karen. She's a taskmaster. I work with her. That we give her that responsibility.
And we can review, discuss, modify.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're just bringing a draft
That's it.
of some ideas.
100%
And that can be part maybe of our next work session as well.
Brilliant. And I love the work session idea.
Yes,
About looking
I
at
do
our
too.
plan. We
I
should
do
be doing
too.
that every year, all the time, reviewing, monitoring,
Yes.
evaluating, and changing.
Okay. Can I get a second? Okay. Any discussion? Cool.
Sounds good.
Good. Now, Karen, do you want to ask for volunteers to work with? Now, wait a minute. You was going to work with some folks.
Yeah, but not yet. I need to process in my own head first, if that's okay. Does that not work?
And then you'll just email the group?
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
That's fine.
it takes me a little while to process in my head.
Fine with me. And since we're doing this, there was somebody else who volunteered to do something. Who was it? Somebody help me now. Somebody.
Ben's
Oh,
name.
Kendra.
Ben's like,
I'd like to make another
Ben's name's on
recommendation.
here too.
I would like to recommend that we ask Kendra Hughes and whoever else wants to work with Kendra to begin to work on our PowerPoint. Are you leaving?
Yeah.
No, I was going to recommend something for you too. Yeah, right? Well, you know, if you're not here, we can still vote on it. We'll send you an email of what you're gonna have to do, okay?
Or they can make you the chair.
So I'd like to recommend that Kendra and company work on a PowerPoint presentation that we can use when we do our outreach and communication stuff.
I'm loving this.
Ain't nobody second that.
This is
Come on
awesome.
now.
A second.
Oh, look, we got a lot of seconds. They couldn't even talk.
Add to that,
Can you do a friendly amendment?
Yeah, I can't do a member. I was just saying, can you, someone add to that, that she helps us choose which sites to visit first?
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. She doesn't know that the next recommendation is gonna be that she lead the groups.
I am so proud of this.
All those in favor, say yes.
Yes.
All those opposed? Okay. Thank you, Kendra.
Smiling.
Okay,
Awesome.
so I would like to make a recommendation that we need to look at, well, maybe this is something that I can work with Kendra on, about the sites. And I'll let Abdi off the hook for right now. But I think we connect with him to get some of his thinking around the family engagement piece. Yeah. So, you know what? We worked y'all today. And it was good. It was good. And I'm a little sad that we're not meeting next month, because it seems like we got some momentum going, you know? And you kind of lose that when you're skipping. Markeisha, you need us because you're understaffed.
So excited.
Yes. Cynthia?
All three motions approved. I just heard the last one for the PowerPoint. What about the Karens?
Yes, that was approved.
Yes, it was approved.
About the what? I can't hear you.
Karens.
Yes.
Yes.
Just making sure they were both approved.
I hear what she said.
She said she wanted to make sure all the motions were approved.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. There was one that they were so excited they couldn't even talk. They just raised their finger. Yeah.
But it sounds like we need a membership matrix
We do.
also.
Yep. Yes.
Because I heard about membership limits and all that, and I don't mind working on, it's a board matrix. I don't mind putting one together and sending it out and getting feedback for it. But we do need a membership matrix on how, how can we stratify the constituent groupings.
Well, I think one of the things that I was looking at was just looking at the people that we've lost.
Yes.
If we could just get people from those places, if we could get somebody from Southern Oregon, well, we do have someone.
Yeah, Marjorie. From
Marjorie,
Southern Oregon.
she's just
From
not here
Where's she
today.
at?
SOU, she's not here today.
Oh, okay. I thought we had somebody from Southern Oregon, so we got that filled. But I understand what you're saying, having a matrix where we can look at who's on the committee,
Right.
what role group.
Constituent group.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes. And then we can have a discussion about, and see, once again, I think we're kind of like in a holding pattern because we don't know what Colt and the state board and the governor's office are going to come up with that might impact our composition, because that's what they're talking about.
I don't think we have to worry that much about that. We'll see.
Oh. Okay.
Is that what you're volunteering?
Well, if you want me to put a matrix together, I would have to talk with someone to see
Well,
where everybody is.
Markeisha,
I can
hold on.
do that.
Can't you do that? Can't your department do that? Y'all
We can
got
give
all
you
the stuff.
information.
Reggie, they can do all of that. I mean, we don't exactly work for the department, we're
Don't,
volunteers.
today, a little, but right.
Yeah, today, a little, you better say hallelujah. No, Laurie,
The appointing authority for all of the members who serve on this, isn't it the Speaker of the House? So, no?
no, it was, it was, Salam.
It was
It was Salam.
Deputy Super.
That's who it was.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is
So-
why Colt is doing this, yeah.
Okay. I was just trying to figure out where this decision
No, it
rightfully
came,
lies.
it came from Salam.
All right.
And so we all got letters of appointment, and then I got an extra letter asking if I'd be willing to serve as co-chair along, and Charles also. So my understanding now is they're looking at whether or not they even want to have co-chairs on these committees. Ben?
On membership, I can follow up with Marquisha on this because it really just relates to, I think, my position. But there is some awkwardness for me as a agency director and a member of the committee, even when it comes to things like making, voting on recommendations to the deputy superintendent, who is a sort of colleague and, head of a partner agency within the state. And so I wonder, and again, I can follow up with you or talk to Colt about it. I wonder whether a certain kind of delineation of responsibility for other agency staff, or at least me in my role. I don't certainly don't want to speak for Bobby or any of the other folks, but because in a sense, I feel like the plan is addressed in part to the Higher Education Commission and community, to ODE certainly, and so there's just sort of an awkwardness in my. I very much appreciate being part of the conversation. I think it's really important for us to be at this table, but it may not be in quite the same capacity as a sort of voting member of the advisory committee representing community groups, schools, colleges and universities, et cetera, but rather state staff.
But the other part of it, though, is that you're written into the legislation as having to be a part of this committee, and I would assume, and my reading of this is that you have all rights and responsibilities of everybody else, which is why somebody approached you about being at these meetings.
I understand.
Yeah, understand that?
I have read the legislation. I'm well aware of it.
Okay.
And
We'll figure it out.
that was just a friendly it was that cookie. I never ate one of them coconut chocolate chip cookies. It's got me up here. Yes.
I want to throw out one last motion, just to formalize the recommendation that you said. So along with our recommendation about allowing members on the committee who have been awarded a grant or might be awarded a grant, that the committee also recommend that the deputy superintendent prioritize replacing members for geographic representation.
Oh, I'll second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. This has been a wonderful meeting. Let me just tell you that. We've started off the new year with a lot of energy, and I can see, us moving forward in a way that is going to benefit everybody and all the kids in the state, not just African-American children, but specifically African-American children. So I just want to thank all of you for your active participation today. I particularly want to thank Cynthia and Bobby for keeping it real and keeping me happy. And we will meet again in March. See, I got this.
We wanted to be March.
I sure did. I told Marquisha, I said, we need to meet next month. And she said, we don't have the capacity. I was willing to come down and do whatever you needed to have done. But anyway, we will meet in April.
April 6th.
April 6th, to be exact.
Yep.
Make sure you have that on your calendar. And it wouldn't hurt if some of you call some of your colleagues on this committee and tell them that we're moving into a very vigorous work phase and we need them here. That's the bottom line. We need them here. And if they can't be here, let us know how they can support what we're doing. Cynthia Richardson. Yes, Cynthia.
Because she's scared of the gavel.
I just have one more suggestion for our next meeting. Dr. Karen Gray has done an excellent job with one of the other advisory committees with the PowerPoint and the talking points. And I know we had talked about in our next meeting sharing what we're doing. I think it would be great for us to see that example.
Oh, okay, so. Oh, I'd love to.
Volunteering, you
Oh, it'd be
superintendent of the
awesome.
year.
Yeah, that's right, she's superintendent of the year.
Yes,
She
she
needs
is.
to have that responsibility. Which means that we really need to have you taking this around, because as superintendent of Yeah. the year, Yeah. you got the bully It's a good pulpit. part. Yeah, You do. seriously.
You do actually, yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else?
It'd be fun to do.
Anybody else? Oh, no.
Thank you, thank you.
Bobby.
No, it's not even
Okay.
business. I'm just saying, I know we meet on the 6th. My birthday's on the 5th, and I like cookies, so.
You like what?
You only eat half of yours.
But when you order your lunch,
So it's six.
So tomorrow, later on the day.
A cookie for Bobby and your lunch.
What kind of cookie, Bob?
Peanut butter?
Just peanut butter?
Just peanut butter.
Since you were letting people go ahead and talk.
They're taking advantage of me. Because I'm in a good mood.
Just a quick question. So will our, because I have not, and I guess, I feel like some of the times seem to change, and I really should know this. But will our April meeting be too late for us to, present the plan to the legislative committee that's focused on coming up with, that's been tasked with creating a comprehensive education plan?
Actually, you mean the Student Success Joint Committee?
Yes.
They will be meeting on that exact day, as a matter of fact, at 1 o'clock. They're doing a series of meetings around the state, but that day, I have a conflict.
Now, where's that meeting at, Laurie?
I think they're moving it around. I just saw on my calendar that's one of the days they had slotted to start at 1 o'clock. I don't know the exact locations yet. Some of them will just be in the Capitol. This one might be one of those.
So do you think we definitely need to?
We definitely should be a part of that conversation.
Ready in March? What is that?
April.
But we'll have other options. I mean,
There'll be other
Laurie, that
opportunities.
calendar-
Meetings been posted then?
Oh, okay.
What's that?
Has a calendar of their meetings been posted?
Well, what they're doing during the session is meeting Fridays at 1 o'clock. And
Okay.
so it may be that I just have that because I haven't had an end date to my weekly meeting piece, so it
Okay.
might be, yeah. But I know that they're planning a road show, and that hasn't been released yet. But meanwhile, if anybody wants to testify, they are meeting as of next week on Fridays at 1 o'clock in the Capitol. Next week. The session starts Monday morning.
Okay. No more.
Your birthday to Phil.
Meeting is adjourned.
I wasn't ready.